Welcome. We are 5 minutes away from the first seven-party debate of this general election, hosted by the BBC. I'm Michael Walker. You're going to be getting my reactions throughout the debate. And we have wonk extraordinaire, is what I'm going to call you, James Meadway, joining us.
I'll take that.
You'll take that? Or host, of course, of Macrodose podcast, former advisor to John McDonnell. James, how are you feeling about this? Are you excited for this seven-way?
I mean, it's surely going to be more interesting than the main leaders' debate. I mean, like once the election looks pretty much like a foregone conclusion, Rishi Sunak seems to be working quite hard to make it even more of a foregone conclusion that Labour is going to win. The real fight is what happens underneath that. So this should be more interesting, right? There's seven parties there representing genuinely different strands of opinion. I'd expect a little bit more interest, and to fight your way through seven people, you're going to have to be quite combative. So hopefully not such a snooze fest.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think when you watch one of the reasons why the Keir Starmer Rishi Sunak debate was so boring is because both of them are trying to, well, especially Keir Starmer is trying to avoid sort of making mistakes. So they're both super conservative. With this one, you're going to have a lot of smaller parties who see this as a massive opportunity to just get heard, to be in any way recognized. So it does have a lot of opportunity to be a bit more interesting. Not so many party leaders this time. So the Tories have Penny Mordaunt, Labour have Angela Rayner, the Lib Dems have Daisy Cooper. The reason they're not putting up their leaders is because I think they're worried it's going to be a bit chaotic and it wouldn't be prime ministerial to be having sort of be ganged up by all of these smaller parties. The Greens will have their leader Carla Denyer, SNP Stephen Flynn, Plaid Cymru, Rena Byorworth, and then Reform Nigel Farage. Is he going to be the big player in this debate, James?
Well, he's probably going to try to be, and we'll say a few wild things that can be clipped and circulated. I mean, that's the other aim here. Your audience, obviously, is the audience on watching it live, but then there's an audience beyond where you want to get something as your clip. So you'll probably do that. Amongst the seven, though, he's quite. It's a hard push to fight your way through, and he does somewhat weirdly suffer from that disadvantage of like everyone knows who he is. So there's a sort of element to which he doesn't need to fight so much. He doesn't need to present himself or say what he stands for, because pretty much anybody watching is going to have a very clear idea by this point of who Farage is and what he stands for.
Anything you want to see particularly, any arguments you want to see made, anything that's been missing from this election you're hoping will get drawn out here?
Well, the thing that's been missing, the entire election debate has been pretty farcical in lots of different ways. The fact is that we have £20 billion worth in single year cuts lined up to public service in Britain. Neither main party's spoken about what they're actually going to do. Are they going to implement those cuts? Same austerity that George Osborne did, but on top of the austerity George Osborne did? Or are they going to raise taxes? Are they going to borrow more? Are they going to do any of these things? The Greens have raised the idea of taxing the wealthy, and good that they should be doing that. Why aren't Labour talking about this? And if the Tories are going to do cuts, why aren't they telling us that they're going to do cuts? So I would like to see some part of that being addressed in this for starters.
Yeah, you should have, lots of issues just being brought up that weren't brought up in the other debates because you've got a broader range of opinions, right? So you have got the Greens who want a wealth tax, as far as I understand. The Lib Dems, they haven't published their manifesto yet, not particularly clear, but I would say they probably will have some kind of tax on the rich to distinguish themselves from the Labour Party. SNP, Plaid, generally a bit more favourable towards tax. Nigel Farage is obviously going to be pushing the debate in a different direction. We will be with you throughout. Let us know what you're expecting from this debate. You can give us a super chat. You can tweet on the hashtag Novara Live, and we'll show some on screen where we can sort of respond to once the debate is over. As I'm sure you already know, we are funded by our audience. If you would like to become a supporter, please go to novaramedia.com/support. The debate will be hosted by Michelle Hussain. She's sort of the Radio 4's main interviewer in the morning. She's quite good, actually. So I'd imagine this might be a bit more piercing. The next debate between the two leaders, well, actually, I don't think this is a debate, is it? It's just a Sky Leaders special. That's on Wednesday at 7 p.m. immediately after Novara Live. We'll be doing the same thing. Then Penny Mordaunt is really going to be ready to get out there. And is she going to defend Rishi Sunak having missed half of the D-Day ceremony? Or is she going to say she would have gone, he made a mistake, and she has got a military background, which is going to be quite helpful for her? She can sort of say, because Rishi Sunak keeps saying, well, I might have left, but the Tories have had XYZ policy over the past however many years. What matters is policy, not character. And people think, you just shouldn't have left, mate. Whereas I think she's going to be able to have a comeback, which is, a bit more to do with her character. She is going to be able to say that she is a patriotic person, whereas Rishi Sunak is not. But then she's obviously going to get pushed on that. Well, if you would, why didn't he? What do you think Labour are going to try and get out of this, James? Oh, we're going to go straight to debate, actually.
Britain's 7 largest political parties respond to the questions that matter to you in the election debate, hosted by Michelle Hussein. You can watch this with signing on the BBC News channel.
7 political parties, 7 leading figures who believe they have the answers to the UK's future. Welcome to the BBC election debate. Good evening to all of you watching and to our live audience here in the BBC Radio Theatre at Broadcasting House in London. With less than 4 weeks to polling day, the parties with us tonight are here because of their performance in recent elections and their standing in opinion polls. The invitation was for leaders or leading figures to take part. And tonight, the 7 debaters with us are: for the Conservatives, Leader of the House of Commons; the Leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage; Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner; Rhys ap Iorwerth, the Leader of Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales; Carla Denyer, co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales; the Liberal Democrats' Deputy Leader, Daisy Cooper; and the Scottish National Party's Westminster Leader, Stephen Flynn. Now, the parties drew lots to decide their position on stage, and they stand before an audience who have been chosen by the pollsters Savanta. They come from many different backgrounds, reflecting voters from across Great Britain. They include supporters of the 7 parties represented here, as well as some undecided voters. They may come to this with strong views, or they may find themselves persuaded by something they hear from the stage. And the questions that you will hear in the next 90 minutes will come from the audience. The time will go fast. We need to make sure all 7 get their say, and there will be times that I move them on or call a halt. Meanwhile, journalists and other representatives of the parties are gathered in our spin room, where there will be reaction to the live debate. And so, to the first of tonight's questions, and it comes from Francis Gottesman.
As we celebrate D-Day and remember those like my father and so many others who served this country so well, how will the parties ensure our army is ready and our country is safe from another major conflict?
Thank
that wasn't
you,
a direct
Mr.
question
Gottesman.
on the D-Day
turn
event.
first to Angela Rayner for Labour.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you to all those that have served in our armed forces and continue to do so in what is a very, insecure world at the moment. First of all, Labour's committed to the triple lock on nuclear deterrent, especially in the climate that we're in, which means we will keep our nuclear deterrent, that we will make sure that the 4 submarines are built in Barrow, and that we will continue with the upgrades. We will have a commitment to the 2.5% spending of GDP, which obviously is very important. And I think one of the other things that is a real scandal at the moment is our armed forces and the accommodation that they're given. So we will look at that issue as well. We want to make sure that everyone has secure, decent homes in the UK.
Okay. Daisy Cooper for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, the Liberal Democrats are the party of Paddy Ashdown, so it won't surprise you to know that we take defence very seriously. So first of all, we would maintain the nuclear deterrent that we have. An absolute priority for us is reversing the cuts to our troops of 10,000, which has happened under the Conservatives. We would increase spending on defence year on year in the next Parliament, with the ambition of reaching 2.5% by the end of the next Parliament. Having decent homes for our veterans and for our armed forces is incredibly important. I'm very proud of the fact that it was a Liberal Democrat amendment that tried to make sure that that every single home met the decent home standard. It was only because this general election was called that particular piece of legislation fell, but it's a priority for us in the next Parliament.
Nigel Farage, Reform UK.
Well, Francis, you're right to ask the question. We're spending less on defence than we were in the last year of the Labour government, pro rata. The army has shrunk from 100,000 to 72,000. Recruitment is catastrophic. So rather than having a weird concept of national service where 30,000 youngsters would do a year, we need to recruit 30,000 people into the army full-time. And yes, the veterans point's been made already. Respect our veterans, including those with the average age of 100 who were deserted by the Prime Minister in Norway.
He was the first one to go in.
I think was a complete and utter disgrace and shows us we actually have a very unpatriotic Prime Minister. It was dreadful.
But Penny Mordaunt, can you respond to that? Rishi Sunak leaving the D-Day commemorations before the end of the day?
What happened was completely wrong, and the Prime Minister has rightly apologised for that, apologised to veterans, but also
not how you want to start an election debate.
Because he was representing all of us. I'm from
My boss was completely wrong.
I've also been Defence Secretary, and my wish at the end of this week is that all of our veterans feel completely treasured. And I'm hoping tonight to convince you of some things that are important to them, important to their legacy. And I couldn't do that if I wasn't straight with you on that issue.
Would you have left D-Day early?
I didn't go to D-Day. I think what happened was very wrong. I think the Prime Minister has apologised for that. But what I also think is important is we honour their legacy. They fought for our freedom. Unless we are spending the right amount on defence, we can't honour that legacy. The baseline for our equipment programme is 2.5%. If you're not committed to spending that over the period it needs to be spent, you are not funding defence. And I have to just mention also, the cornerstone of our defence is our nuclear deterrent. And you need more than submarines, sailors and warheads to deliver that. You need credibility.
A quadruple lock.
It's too late for Labour on credibility. Angela Rayner voted recently, along with the guy that wants to be your foreign secretary and half the Labour front bench, to end our nuclear deterrent. If you're doubting that they would use that force, and she might be Prime Minister in 4 or 5 years' time, if you are doubting that she or David Lammy or Keir Starmer would use that, imagine what Putin is thinking. Without credibility, we become a target. If we become a target, you are less safe. It's too late for this generation of Labour politicians.
Unless you're desperate to push the nuclear button, then Russia is going to invade.
Angela Rayner, would you like to respond to that?
Penny, you can keep pointing at me.
I'll blow them all up.
The party that have cut the armed forces, crashed the economy and left us in a real mess. Keir has been absolutely clear. I am absolutely clear. We will keep our nuclear deterrent and we will invest in it into the future.
It doesn't matter
we
what you're prepared to spend.
Clear on that.
It doesn't matter how many submarines you stand next to and have your photograph taken. If your foe does not believe that you will use these weapons, the deterrent is gone. Well, and that's the position you're in. Serious stuff. This is what will happen if you elect these people.
We've become
what will happen? What is it that will happen?
Vladimir Putin will evade.
Because of your party. Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party. We're very clear on our number one priority is to protect our.
Let me bring in some more parties.
Yeah, let's hear from someone with a less crazy position, please.
Like to hear the Greens in this.
Be lectured on whether or not I'm absolutely committed to the security of our country.
Then you're not better informed.
The question, Mr. Gottesman's question was, how will the parties ensure our army is ready and our country is safe from another major conflict? Carla Denyer, how would the Green Party ensure that?
Well, first of all, I want to say we all owe a huge debt to our veterans, those from D-Day and those from conflicts since. And it's a tragedy that so many veterans then often struggle in life. There's high rates of homelessness, and that's something that's a high priority for myself and the Greens to tackle. In terms of defence more broadly, this election is about choosing what kind of country we want to be. And of course, part of that is security. We live in uncertain and dangerous times with war on our European borders and major threats from cyber attacks that don't care about geographical boundaries. The threats should not be underestimated. But the biggest threat facing the UK and the world is climate change. And militaries interestingly, are taking this threat extremely seriously.
So in answer to the question, how would you ensure our army is ready, do you not want to see the size of the army grow, and you do not want to see defence spending go up to 2.5% of GDP?
Well, let's look for a moment at why we're talking about that number. As members of NATO, we are rightly asked to contribute a fair amount towards the defence budget. That's totally fair enough for NATO to ask for that. But the UK is already contributing the 2% that NATO asks. That doesn't mean, however, that we couldn't be spending that money more effectively. And as Greens, we're clear that investing in tackling climate threats, the biggest threat facing humanity, as militaries all over the world are already doing, because they recognise that if not tackled adequately, it will increase conflicts over water, for example, increase famine, and create millions of refugees.
Let me turn then to Stephen Flynn.
I think that's a good point, but I'm not even myself sure how an army deals with climate change, and I'm probably, more politically attuned or alert than most people watching this, so maybe that should have been made a bit clearer.
Tradition in respect of that, because we believe that money can be better spent on conventional defence forces. And what we've seen in Europe over the course of recent years is that how absolutely vital conventional defence forces are. But may I just return to the original question and thank Francis for his father's contribution. We need to be standing with our veterans. We need to make sure that our military is fully funded and that we have more people serving and that we look after them when they become veterans. And just finally on the Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who puts his own political career before public service is no Prime Minister at all. A Prime Minister who puts his own political career before Normandy war veterans is no Prime Minister at all. So it's incumbent upon all of us to do our national service and vote the Tories out of office.
Breen Up-Your-Worth, the flight
You're getting one person clap and then no one goes along with it.
Sobering day again, wasn't it, in remembering the sacrifice made on the beaches of Normandy. It certainly wasn't a day for staged photo ops, as we saw from Nigel Farage.
Hang on a second.
Yes.
I raised £100,000. I raised £100,000 for the London Taxi Charity to send veterans back to Normandy. That's why I was there. Thank you.
And it certainly wasn't a day for a Prime Minister to decide, as Stephen said, that his priority should be to fight for his own political future. We have a proud record in Wales of sending young men and women to the armed forces, and we need to make sure that the armed forces are properly funded for conventional deterrence and peacekeeping, and we need to look after those young people when they leave the armed forces with so many problems in housing and mental health issues and so on. But we don't build that resilient conventional force by spending £200 billion on a new nuclear deterrent.
Thank you. Penny Mordaunt, to come back to you.
People in the comments saying that if George Galloway had been invited, he would wipe the floor with this panel on this question, which is true.
Amounting to no presence at all.
And amounting to?
Amounting to no presence at all on D-Day. How did you feel when you realised that he had attended the British event and other parts of the day, but he left before the international event at the end of the day?
Look, I think what happened was very wrong, and I'm glad the Prime Minister has said that, and he's apologised. He's apologised to veterans, but I think he also has apologised to everyone, because he was there representing us. And what I hope is that our veterans will feel treasured and their families will feel treasured at the end of this week. I don't want this issue to become a political football, because I think that does them a
Well, it already is. It already is, because the veterans themselves are speaking out saying he's let the country down. And to say that it's a mistake, if his instinct was the same as the British people, he would never have contemplated for a moment not being there for the big international ceremony. And it shows how disconnected he is with the people of this country.
He's apologised.
I think what we saw from the Prime Minister was panic, and I think it's the same pre-election panic that gave us that back of a fag packet plan for a new national service, which those in the armed forces have said that wouldn't be workable, let alone what it means about what the Prime Minister thinks of our young people in this country.
Let's be clear about what happened yesterday. It was not only politically shameful, but I think
First interruption from Farage, and now everyone is coming in to stick the knife into Rishi Sunak.
Watching a recording made by the Royal Mint of my late grandfather, where he recounts catching his best friend who fell from the top of a Sherman tank, who was shot in the head. And as he waded through the water, he recounted in his words, men blown to pieces, hands, legs, and heads. Okay. If he had been there yesterday and seen the Prime Minister walk away from him, I would have found that completely, as I do now, find it completely and utterly unforgivable.
Okay. Thank you very much for the responses. That was our first question.
That was a worthwhile interruption from the Lib Dem.
From Ishani Rudra.
So, I'm about to start studying medicine at the University of Manchester. How will the parties ensure I can graduate into a fully functioning NHS?
Thank you, Ishani. So just about to start studying medicine at Manchester University. Daisy Cooper.
Well, first of all, really good luck. I hope it goes incredibly well. We need lots of people signing up and studying to become the medics and our NHS staff of the future. Look, under the Conservatives, our health and social care services have been driven into the ground. And the Liberal Democrats have a very clear plan as to how to fix this. We're going to fix the front door to the NHS with 8,000 more GPs, giving you a guarantee of an appointment within 7 days. We're going to put an end to dental deserts. We'll have a mental health community hub in every single community. And we've made a very bold pledge to fix and to offer free personal care. That means you can get the help you need when you need it. We can fix the back end to the NHS by making sure that if you need to leave hospital, there will be care in place.
What's the total annual cost of all the changes you're making?
So we have set out in our manifesto exactly how every single pledge is going to be funded. But we've said right across the piece, across all of our policies, we will not tax struggling families during a cost of living crisis, but we will be looking to those really big companies raking in billions of pounds of profits to support struggling families and to fix our public services.
Okay. Health is, of course, a devolved issue.
We see Labour once again, Lib Dems going to the left of Labour again.
Health in Scotland. It is
we remember them in coalition there.
And high numbers of people waiting, for example, 12 hours or more in A&E or 24 months for treatment. How would you ensure that Ishani graduates into a fully functioning NHS?
Yes, well, Ishani, good luck to start with. As someone who was under the care of the NHS from the age of 14 to 32, because I was a disabled man, and I physically wouldn't be standing here today but wasn't for the wonderful treatment that I received from the NHS. I know what it is to live in chronic pain, and I know what it is to have that chronic pain removed. And it's only thanks to the NHS that happened, which is why in Scotland we don't just have record funding, we don't just have the best paid nursing staff, we don't have no strikes, we don't have a single NHS strike in Scotland. And of course, we do have some of the best performing NHS levels in Scotland as well. But given that you're going to university to study medicine, I think it's also important to remind everyone in this audience the difference between the SNP and the Westminster parties. Because
he's got a good answer for this one, hasn't he?
Scotland, you wouldn't pay a single penny in tuition.
No strikes and no tuition fees.
What a difference that would make to your education and your future.
First round of applause of the evening.
You do accept that you have record waits for treatment at the moment, and that there are very high numbers of people waiting 24 months or waiting sometimes as long as 24 hours in A&E.
And indeed, nobody would seek to dismiss the challenges which exist in our NHS right across these aisles, primarily driven through two issues. One, the backlog from COVID, but secondly, the austerity agenda, which is impacting us from Westminster and has done over the course of the last 14 years. And there's £18 billion of cuts coming down the line, agreed to by Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt. The Tories and the Labour both know that they're going to cut public sector investment to come, and that's going to have dramatic consequences on the NHS in the devolved nations, because as Wes Streeting himself said, when it comes to NHS waiting times, all roads lead back to Westminster. It's why the cuts that are coming down the line aren't acceptable, and it's why the Labour Party need to change their stance.
Angela Rayner, cuts coming down the line?
Well, that's not true, because we've said that we'd end the non-dom loophole.
Are you disagreeing with the IFS?
Which gets you £3 billion, doesn't it?
Loophole, so that we can bring that money in and have 40,000 new appointments every week.
But you're familiar with what Stephen is referring to. The IFS saying that both of your parties are not being honest because of the promises that you've made to bring debt down.
We're going to invest more in the NHS. And then, Ashani, thank you for studying in Manchester. I'm biased, but I'd say it's the greatest city. But I do think that there is an issue that since
we just want a GP appointment, Angela.
Worker, and I represented public sector workers across the Northwest and nationally, and the decimation of the social care services and the infrastructure around community services has actually not only left us without that community care, but it costs more in the NHS. Far too many people, especially our older generation, we've just been talking about D-Day and our veterans, they're on trolleys for hours on end not getting the care they need, but it costs more money to do that. So we would put home care services in. It costs less to do that, and we would have 40,000 new appointments every week in the NHS by making sure we close that non-dom tax loophole.
The non-dom is not going to close the £18 billion fiscal gap which the Institute for Fiscal Studies says exists. There is a conspiracy of silence between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in relation to this. You need to explain to the public how you are going to close that gap without making NHS services worse.
We have been very clear that we're going to look at efficiencies as well, so we can have technologies.
£18 billion
we would
of
have
efficiencies,
technologies that will come in. We all know that that would help. We've said about the closing the non-dom
It is a very
tax
dishonest election campaign.
More appointments, whether that's through dentistry, GP, and with hospital appointments. We have the record number of waiting lists in the country now, and all roads lead to the Tories and what they've done to our public services.
And how is your fiscal plan different?
Let's get Penny Mordaunt to respond to that.
So Manchester's second only to Portsmouth, and we're just about to have both a dental school and a medical school very shortly, and good luck with your studies. Your future colleagues are currently dealing with an increase in NHS workload of about 43%. That's the legacy of the pandemic that we have to deal with.
And the Conservative government of 14 years.
Really important things. We have to keep the budget strong. You need a strong economy to do that, and public spending is going to go up. It will go up, and for the NHS, very substantially. The only people on this platform who have ever cut the NHS budget are Labour. In Wales, they've cut it 4 times, and that's why their waiting lists are 4 times longer than they are in England.
NHS
not only
funding
can
is going
you
down
not
when you account
afford
for ageing and inflation.
A Labour government, the NHS can't afford it either. But the second thing we also need to do is
That's not really what it looked like between 97 and 2010, right? Everything was going up when Labour were in power, or satisfaction was going up when Labour were in power. It goes down when the Tories get into power.
People in the service. We've got to take the stress off people, but we also have to remove barriers to them continuing
You do
in service.
acknowledge, don't you, that the pandemic is not completely part of waiting lists. They were rising
Senior
before.
nurses and doctors is going to get healthcare professionals to leave the service. That is going to lead to more waiting lists.
That's rubbish. And you've just said that we need a strong economy. You backed Liz Truss and crashed our economy. You made people like me redundant when we were in the home care service.
Even Liz Truss, on her worst day, still recognised that we need a nuclear deterrent in this country, Angela.
And so do I.
That's a pivot.
We need to hear from more parties. Penny Mordaunt, I'm going to go to Rena Pureworth next.
I'm going to be very nice with Ashani. My life may be in your hands one day, but thank you for studying medicine, and do enjoy it. I mean, I have a privilege of speaking for Wales here this evening, but hopefully what I say will have relevance for people wherever they are in the UK. I think one thing you want is an assurance about what kind of NHS we will have in future. And my party is absolutely clear. The NHS should and must remain free at the point of need. Another key principle for me and Plaid Cymru is that no profit should be taken out of the NHS. We will not consider ever privatising the NHS, something that, of course, the Conservatives want to do, but remarkably, Labour are happy to see privatisation within the NHS now too. But, you know, we in Wales have had a double whammy. We've had the impact of the cuts of austerity that absolutely comes down to hitting public services, education and health and everything, plus a very badly managed NHS by Labour in Wales.
I do want to point out that you were in a cooperation agreement with Welsh Labour until very recently, until just a few weeks ago, and we have record waiting lists in Wales.
And the NHS was in no way a part of that cooperation agreement because we do not agree with Labour's approach on the NHS in Wales. My job as an opposition member is to persuade them to make some bold decisions to take us on the right direction. But you know what? You need more than anything, Ashani, is assurance that sustainability will be built in for the workforce within the NHS. Workforce planning and giving you the support through your pay packet, one, but all those other means that show that you are valued as a health worker.
OK, Nigel Farage.
Whether it's Labour-run Wales or SNP-run Scotland or Conservative-run England, we all know that whilst you can get great care, the NHS model isn't working. You can't get GP appointments, things that we've all grown up taking for granted.
Is he going to blame migrants?
And they can argue about, it's all money. I'm going to spend more money. You're going to spend more money. It doesn't work. Just a few years ago, we were spending 7.5% of the national cake on the NHS.
He wants to privatise it, doesn't he? Australia model.
Or both. You can go for both.
On the NHS.
So the answer to Ashani's question, how would you ensure she graduates into a fully functioning NHS?
NHS, well, I'm going to answer it. Because the more money we spend, The more money we spend, the less delivery we get, which means the model is wrong. The model through which we fund health is wrong.
So this is Nigel telling us he doesn't believe in the NHS. This is what he's doing. He's telling the public he does not believe in the NHS.
No, I'm telling you,
you want
the
to
funding
privatise
model,
it. That is what you want to do.
And you in Scotland, of all places, I mean, look, the NHS is
I would
very
have expected
badly
him to
run.
actually modify this position now he's within a real shot of overtaking the Tories.
Private
Invest in
healthcare.
our NHS, not crush it.
Strange, isn't it?
Change the model. Now, the NHS, it isn't funded through national insurance. That's a nonsense. It goes into the pot. There are countries right next door to us. There's one country, France, that has a very, very different way of funding the NHS. It's rather like those that can afford, through their taxes, pay into an insurance scheme. Those that can't afford it don't pay in, so it's for the mutual benefit of everybody, and it's managed as if it was a private company, and their returns on stroke, heart and cancer are better than ours for exactly the same sum of money.
The King's
He
Foundation.
is actually right on the French system to some degree.
Spend,
Very dangerous to say that politically, though.
we're not spending our money properly, and that's the point.
Daisy, you'll have to make it very brief because I need to get to Carla
The
Denny.
Hill Foundation and the King's Fund have done an analysis of different funding models. They don't materially make a difference to people's health outcomes. What makes a big difference, most of all, is the amount of money you put into your health service.
And the Green Party.
And independent experts say.
It works. Let's learn from it.
I'd like to hear from Carla Denny on this.
And the Green Party, the party that's ready to be honest about the need for investment, because Ishani, you're quite right to ask the question, and thank you for stepping into this important vocation. The NHS has been chronically underfunded for decades. It's on its knees. This cannot be allowed to continue. Most of us agree about that. But the answer is not, as the Conservatives and, surprisingly, Labour think, to invite big multinational companies further into our National Health Service. The answer is investment and protecting our NHS.
And the money comes from?
Well, we announced our health and social care policy just yesterday, and that included a £30 billion increase in funding for our health services, 20 billion on social care, and it's really important that we understand how closely those are linked, because if we have better social care, it takes the pressure off the NHS, and a one-off £20 billion capital investment.
These are large sums.
They
come from where?
They come from reforming the tax system, because currently the UK tax system is unbelievably unfair. It puts more onus on lower income working people to contribute to the Treasury than it does towards the super rich, the millionaires, the multimillionaires and the billionaires. And so the Greens would make some adjustments to that system so that those with the broadest shoulders who can most easily afford to pay quite a modest amount, and that will provide plenty of funding for decent investment in public services that benefit all of us.
Okay. Thank you, Carla Denny.
An answer much easier to understand than the sort of climate change military answer. We will tax the rich more so that we can give you a good NHS. Very good.
Where I live in Essex, I'm struggling to find a house. I've noticed the roads are busier and it's almost impossible to get a doctor's appointment. I think immigration is partly to blame. What are the parties going to do about immigration?
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for that. And I'm going to turn first to Stephen Flynn.
So I accept the premise of what you're saying in respect of your area. I'm afraid I don't know it very well, but let me say a few home truths, particularly to some members of this panel. Migration is absolutely essential to our public services, it's absolutely essential to our businesses, and it's absolutely essential.
Round of applause. We didn't hear that in the Starmer-Sunak debate.
And what we need to do is end the demonisation of migration. In Scotland, we have a declining working age population despite a net number of people moving from the rest of the UK to Scotland. We need migrants. And this race to the bottom on migration, driven by Nigel Farage, followed by the Conservative Party and hotly chased by the Labour Party, does not serve Scotland's interests. And it does not serve your interests either. So rise up against it. Do as Keir Starmer did in 2020 and talk about the benefits of migration. It's important to our fundamental aspects of life.
To be clear, any voter in Scotland who wants lower immigration should vote for other parties.
I think any voter in Scotland who wants to impact our economy, impact our NHS, should vote for the parties who want to cut migration. which is the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and Nigel Farage. And this is a consequence of us being led down the garden path by the right wing in British politics for far too long. We need to stand against it. We need to promote our economy, promote our public services, and to do so by promoting migration.
He's really making an impression.
Incredible to hear that. Incredible to hear that.
I'm on a platform tonight with 6 other people whose parties have been wholly unconcerned with the issue of immigration. They think that to even question it somehow makes you a bad person. Let's get back to Lorenzo's question.
I just want to see Stephen Flynn versus Nigel Farage.
From the end
Carla
of the
Denyer as well.
Until Mr. Blair got to power, listen to the numbers. You probably don't know them. For 50 years, net migration into Britain was 30 to 40,000 a year. Then Tony Blair gets in, decides to open the doors. We get net migration for the period of the Labour government of 2.7 million people come in that period. Then we get the Conservatives, elected in 2010, 2015, 2017, telling us they'll reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. 4.3 million the Conservatives have led in. Most of those that come in are not directly productive members of the economy. Most of those that come in are actually dependents. And Lorenzo, the truth of it is, this ought to be the immigration election. Because whether we talk about housing, whether we talk about the fact that rents are up between 20 and 30%.
A dependent can still be economically productive, right? So if you're an international student, you can bring your partner, but they'll still get a job, even if it's a dependent visa.
Through a population crisis, an increase of 10 million people since Mr. Blair came to power, and frankly, it's making us poorer, it is diminishing our quality of life, and it's nothing to do with race or any of those issues. It's to do with actually putting the interests of our communities first. We need to get net migration, and that means, by the way, people come and people go. We need to get net migration down to an even figure for the next few years, and maybe then we can hope to catch up with housing, with health, and many of those.
What do you do about an ageing population in that situation?
The UK today are on work visas or are international students.
About 50% of those that come are dependents. Whether they're coming with work
But the rules
visas,
are changing.
family,
The rules are changing.
family reunions. We've even had under the Conservatives students
Family
coming.
reunion, they'll still be working. If you bring over your sister or your kid or whatever, they'll still get a job.
Flynn,
you've
had a say on this. Can I turn to Renat Fioraworth, please?
Nigel Farage wants to make this an immigration election for his own self-interest. Let's change the tone. Let's change the tone of the debate on immigration. You know, too much of it is framed around, frankly, the bigotry of people like Nigel Farage.
Please. Is that the best you can do?
Penny Mordaunt can't stand up to Nigel Farage because she wants her party to be like Nigel Farage.
They're the opposite.
Angela Rayner can't stand up to Nigel Farage because of the shift in her party to the right. Plaid Cymru will stand up to Nigel Farage.
Open doors, everyone come.
Of course we need rules.
It's interesting that the audience is supposed to be representative because, I mean, the British public doesn't vote in a way that it really, really likes migration, but these guys are really pro-migration, and every time they get a huge round of applause, obviously positive, but I'm not sure what we should infer from it.
Around your proper processing of asylum applications, we need to stop the vile and expensive Rwanda flights. We need safe passage into this country, and we need to realise that we need immigration for the interests of our health system, our care system, and our economy.
Penny Mordaunt, do you
and more reports
respond to Nigel Farage's charge of broken promises from your party on immigration?
Well, look, this might be an immigration election, but it is definitely going to be a cost of living election. And one thing that we can do to help
and we made you poorer.
The question is about ensuring that you keep more of your money. We will cut your taxes. Labour will put your taxes up.
Was that the question?
If you having more agency, being able to get onto the property ladder, that is
Penny Mordaunt, I am going to remind you of the question.
Election.
Lorenzo's question.
Just with regard
the problems that he set out. He said, I think immigration is partly to blame. What are the parties going to do about immigration?
So immigration is too high. And what we need to do is have a balance between some of the issues that have been raised already. The best way to do this is to get Parliament, your Parliament, elected by you, to have an annual cap. What that will do is take into account the economic needs, the needs of the workforce, but also the pressures that immigration puts on communities, as the question made very clear. That will be informed by experts, but it will be Parliament that decides. And because the numbers are too high, over the next few years, you can see it will come down. That is a clear plan, a clear guarantee. We've already ended free movement. We've done many things. That is the
I didn't actually know that was Tory policy. I didn't know they had a policy for a cap
Unlike
now.
Labour, who have no plan, they have no target, they have no clue, they haven't done any of the work on the workforce. They've had 14 years to work this out. They have nothing to offer you. Controlled numbers and a cap.
Apparently that was new this week. I should have been paying attention.
Immigration under the Labour Party.
How have you got the front to say that?
Let's let Angela Rayner.
People tune out what the Tories offer because they know they're not going to win.
Your party's only said that there'll be a significant cut, but there are no numbers, no time frame attached to that.
I mean, I love the spin on that. 14 years and you failed, trebled net migration figures. But what I would say to Lorenzo is that the problems with housing, the roads and GPs and non-public services is decimation that the Tories have done to our public services.
Your leader campaigned for free movement. Keir Starmer has spent most of his life campaigning for free movement. These guys are not going to control immigration.
And we've said that the Rwanda scheme, look, yesterday, 300 people arrived on a boat. One was a 6-month-old baby. They could have died going over the crossing. We've said we need a new border command. We would scrap the Rwanda scheme, which would have been 300 for the whole year, by the way.
Those numbers are small. They're small compared to legal migration.
We would scrap the Rwanda scheme. We would put that money into a border force command, which will be able to smash the gangs.
Angela Rayner is actually all over the place here.
And 14 years of the Conservatives,
She is being asked about net migration, which is a lot bigger than asylum seekers.
Because we haven't got an industrial and skills strategy. Labour will put one in place so that we can fill the gaps and make sure that we have people in those jobs. People come to this country and they're propping up many of our services because we haven't trained the people to do that.
But
this is how Liberal...
Big round of applause, though.
The tragedy of this is that
It's a very left-wing audience.
more and more to talk the language of the Conservatives and, dare I say, Nigel Farage. Keir Starmer said the other day that, Rishi Sunak was the most liberal Prime Minister when it comes to immigration.
They can talk our language all they like.
I'd like to hear now from Carla Denyer and from Daisy Cooper.
So, Lorenzo, your question started by talking about houses, roads and GPs. We need to build 150,000 social homes a year to tackle the crisis in our housing.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know that either. I should be paying more attention. That's a great policy.
Between 25 and 40%. That's why public services are on their knees. And the Conservatives promised at the last general election to recruit 6,000 GPs. We now have fewer GPs per head right across our country. That's why our public services are on their knees.
So
and
is
that's
he
why
wrong to say that he thinks immigration is partly to blame?
Well, I would say that actually it's to do with the Conservative choices, because at the same time as eroding all of that investment, they've made choices to give a tax cut to the big banks. But on the issue of immigration, I would say the Conservatives have made a complete mess, both of a migration system, but also of the asylum system. And we have the worst of both worlds. We have people who are desperate, who are fleeing war and persecution, arriving on small boats. And at the same time, we have our NHS, our social care, we have hospitality and engineering. None of them can recruit the staff that they need with the skills to boost our economy. So Liberal Democrats have said on care in particular, we should give care workers a higher minimum wage, £2 higher, invest in our care workers, give them status, give them progression in the workforce. And then when we still have skills gaps, invite people in from other countries and welcome them when they come.
Okay. Carla Denyer, what would the Green Party do?
If they hadn't done austerity, the Lib Dems would be quite a persuasive party on the basis of this debate.
How cold-hearted do you have to be to not want people who are coming here on work visas to be able to bring their husbands or wives or infant children with them? The Green Party takes...
You would not want to cut immigration?
The Green Party takes a totally different approach to immigration. When it's hard to get an affordable home, when it's hard to access public services like a GP, when the roads are poorly maintained, I can absolutely understand, Lorenzo, why you're angry about these things. I am too. But I am clear that the reason for these services being run into the ground is not people coming here, whether they're coming here fleeing violence and persecution as asylum seekers, or whether they're coming here to work in many of our understaffed sectors like health and social care. If you meet a migrant in the NHS, they're more likely to be treating you, as I was the last time I saw a GP, than being ahead of you in the queue.
Good answer.
Migration's been a good thing for this country. And so in the Green Party, our immigration policy is not about arbitrary numbers. That's why we're not talking about caps. Instead, it's about making our immigration system fairer and more humane.
Carla Denyer, thank you very much. So we still have quite a few more questions to come. Meanwhile, I want to mention that online on the BBC Live page, our colleagues at BBC Verify are...
What do you think so far, James?
Oh, God, this is streets ahead of the last one. And actually some interesting questions and answers and real political differences. I mean, this is a miraculous turn of events.
Both work. We've got good jobs and we're not eligible for benefits. Our lifestyle isn't extravagant. What we earn goes on gas, electricity, mortgage and food. We are working to survive, not live. This isn't sustainable. Who will change things for working people?
Thank you, Suzanne, for your question. Rena Pureworth.
Change is a key word. It's a change election, isn't it? The sadness is there'll be a change in Downing Street. I'm quite sure that Keir Starmer will become the Prime Minister in 4 weeks' time. But what change does that represent? I will always argue that you need a plurality of voices making the case for exactly what you're looking for. What are the answers when you have two parties converging on public spending, converging on taxation? Who's going to make sure that you're able to see the investment in housing for your children, to see the investment in getting rid of the two-child benefit cap in order for parents to be able to look after their children and take children out of poverty? I believe that the real frustration in this election is the lack of change on offer from the Labour Party. Whether you liked him or not, there was a feeling. I was still working as a journalist back in the 90s when Tony Blair came in. At least there was a feeling of something different happening. I'm just not sensing that, which is why we in Plaid Cymru say the Tories are gone. Labour are going to come into power. But let's, for goodness sake, make sure that people who feel ignored, as you do, are heard by that Labour Party when they came in, because change has to mean something. And that's what's important.
Angela Rayner, Rena Pureworth charges that change is not really going to come with any Labour government.
Well, look, there's been no vote cast at this general election. And Suzanne, I absolutely understand what you're saying. The cost of living, you can't escape what's happened. And Liz Truss crashed the economy, which sent mortgages going sky high. We've been at the mercy of the global energy prices, and therefore energy prices have gone significantly high for people, and also food prices. So Labour's first plan and priority is to secure the economy. We will never go fast and loose with public finances, because it's working people who are paying the price for that. And Great British Energy, which is putting a windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies, which will allow us to set up the publicly owned energy company, which will give taxpayers money back, bring down bills and make us secure for our energy needs for the future, and create thousands of jobs here in the UK. That is real change. That's how we'll deliver an economy that works for working people. And the Tories should never be allowed to forget that the reason they're in the cost of living crisis now is because they crashed the economy and went fast and loose with the public finances.
Penny Mordaunt.
So this is what
See why she said it. It's obviously not the case.
This is what I mean when I say this election is about the cost of living. And what you have been going through, and many other people have been going through, it's exhausting, and we need to bring it to an end. We have supported people through some very difficult times. That has been expensive. But we are now in the recovery. The economy is doing much better. We're outperforming America on growth. We're outperforming Europe on inflation. Those are your achievements.
But inequality continues to get worse.
The recovery going is to give you more money in your pockets. That is why this election must be about us cutting your taxes. We have already started doing that, and you have already heard some announcements. You'll see more in our manifesto next week.
There's going to be tax cuts in the manifesto.
To cut people's taxes, and we have got to alleviate burdens on business. Angela Rayner and the Labour Party, Keir Starmer confirmed this earlier this week, they are going to put up your taxes by £2,000.
That's a lie.
By £2,000 per working household.
Penny, your government
still using that.
raised taxes to the record level in 70 years.
Yeah,
the last
we have,
Parliament,
and we've hated putting taxes up. We have now been cutting taxes. We will continue to cut taxes. The country can afford it.
You're using.
Like Keir Starmer, she's quite slow to deny the £2,000 thing. I don't know why they don't just straight out the blocks debunk, debunk,
She
debunk.
did say it was a lie. She said it was a lie.
Did she? Oh, okay. I'm just not listening
Why
close
don't you
enough.
stand by your record?
And you'll see
record
it.
levels
You'll
of
see
taxes
it.
on working people.
Well, we've
26
heard
separate
overnight-
tax hikes
We've
in the
heard
last
overnight
Parliament.
about 12 new taxes
That's
that
rubbish.
Labour are going to bring in. It's
Absolute
not
rubbish.
Well,
We've
what is it then?
absolutely guaranteed we will not
how are
raise
you gonna
taxes
close
for
that
working
gap?
people in this
How
country.
are you going to close that gap? £2,000 per working household.
It's just a name, really, at this point, isn't it?
Policies are you going to take out of your manifesto?
We've been
Which ones
clear
are you
how we
ditching?
would pay for our
No, you
manifesto.
haven't.
Okay, it's
So
time.
we said that we would level
It's time to hear from the others.
pay for our
Angela Rayner,
teachers.
it's time to hear from the others. Carla Denia.
Well, that was terribly dignified, wasn't it?
Good line. Very good line.
Returning to the question, you don't have to be an economist to see that our economy is not working for the majority of people. Penny is talking about a cost of living crisis, and yes, of course, that's what it is, but you might more accurately describe it as an inequality crisis, because actually some people in this country have been doing very, very well. Some people got substantially wealthier during the pandemic, while many of the rest of us struggled. It doesn't have to be like this. We could have well-paid jobs, secure jobs, and a welfare system that really acts as the safety net we need to catch people when they fall. A green economy would create jobs, well-paid jobs distributed all over the country, for example, on a nationwide home insulation programme, which would bring down everyone's bills, help with the cost of living in the here and now, give us warmer, more comfortable homes, create hundreds of thousands of green jobs, and support local businesses. And the Greens would provide a real safety net, starting with a £15 minimum wage for all ages, removing the ageist cap on young working adults, an immediate uplift to universal credit, and my final point, removing the cruel two-child benefit cap that both the Conservatives and Labour's party support, even though it holds 250,000 children down in poverty.
Thank you, Carla Denia. Nigel Farage.
Good point.
I have to say, I think a lot of working people like you feel quite resentful. The harder you work, the more taxes you pay, the less disposable income you have, and yet there are increasingly people opting just not to work, and that number has rocketed over the course of the last few years. So I understand how you feel. Your energy bills are too expensive. They have been for the last 20 years. Why? Because we load money, we load tax onto your energy bill to give to wind farm companies. It's kind of the poorer in society giving to the richer in society. Rents, cost of housing, too high. That links back to the previous question. The population explosion has made housing, whether you buy them or rents, too expensive. Reducing net migration to zero would ease that. Getting rid
build some more
of
houses,
those
and then you don't have to
subsidies
crash the
on
economy.
your energy bills would ease that. But the big one's taxes. Even during Tony Blair's time, the top rate of tax was 40p in this country, and it was paid by 1.5 million people. By the end of 2027, 8 million people will be paying 40p tax. So we're dragging more and more people doing middle-income jobs into higher and higher taxation. And that's why life is so tough. And to hear Penny Mordaunt, whose government have put the tax burden up to the highest in this country since 1948, pretending they're a tax-cutting party, frankly, it is dishonesty on a breathtaking scale.
Stephen Flynn.
Look, I'm incredibly sorry.
There are some
to
right-wing
hear about
people in the
challenges
audience. There's either less of them or they're less confident.
It's the same for millions of people right across these aisles, and it's simply not good enough. We know the damage that the Tories have caused to the economy as a result of Liz Truss's mini-budget, but I'm afraid the challenges facing the economy are much deeper than that. Firstly, there's austerity. 14 years of austerity, and I must re-emphasise the fact that there's £18 billion worth of cuts baked in, which neither the Labour Party nor the Conservative Party are being honest about.
It is worth repeating.
They're having the worst of Westminster argument between them tonight instead of being honest with you about the fiscal outlook going forward. But there's also a conspiracy of silence on one other issue, and that's Brexit. Because Brexit has impacted the economy more than the COVID pandemic. It has put your food bills up completely unnecessarily. It has been an unmitigated disaster for the economy. And
biggest round of applause of the night. This is not a representative audience. There's something fishy going on here. I'm getting my right-wing conspiracy theorist nut hat on.
Oil salesmen who delivered Brexit, and you need to challenge the Labour Party and the Conservative Party about why they aren't seeking to rejoin the single market, why they aren't seeking to double down on making sure that we return to freedom of movement, and why we aren't investing in our renewables future.
And our exports are at a record high.
Penny, you know for a fact that Brexit has wiped £40 billion worth of tax receipts out of the UK economy. You did that because you were terrified of Nigel Farage. The worrying thing for me, though, is it's not Nigel, it's the silence of the Labour Party when it comes to the damage of Brexit. Silence on £18 billion of cuts, silence on Brexit. The public deserve better and the SNP will provide it.
Daisy Cooper, earlier Stephen Flynn mentioned the austerity years. Your party was alongside the Conservatives in the first part of that.
Elephant in the room.
Well, Liberal Democrats fought the Conservatives every single day in coalition.
No, you didn't. You enabled them, you idiot.
Conservatives have done on their own since 2015.
They only did it because you were in coalition with them.
This awful mini budget.
Agree to the whole thing.
Back to Suzanne's question, I speak to hundreds of people in your situation, people who play by the rules, people who work hard, people who pay their taxes, and they've almost got nothing to show for it. And on top of that, when they go to use their public services, everything feels broken. Nothing works. There's a reason why the Liberal Democrats were the first party to call for a windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies, because we saw the raw injustice of these big companies raking in billions of pounds of profits when ordinary folk couldn't afford to pay their energy bills.
It's going to be another 20 years before people take them seriously on all this shit, isn't it?
We will need to move on now to...
It's still too soon, still too soon.
To that one. And our next question comes from Linda Myers.
Good evening. Why is it when parties want your vote, they promise things, but when they're elected, nothing gets done?
It's a conceptual question, really, isn't it? It's quite a high level, you know.
Well, this is why the Prime Minister made the very clear pledges that he did, and you can measure the progress being made against them.
Didn't you fail 3 out of 5?
We are making progress in this country. We have been through some very hard times, but the recovery is there. What we must ensure is that that is not choked off, and we must ensure that your taxes are being lowered. That is the pledge that we make to you. And that is what we have been doing with national insurance cuts that we have seen this year. That is what you need. It's not just your taxes that I'm worried about. I'm worried about my constituents being able to afford a Labour government. Angela mentioned GB.
She's got a tough hand to play, you know.
Do you know what the GB
Given what she's working with, she's not doing bad.
Bills. And more bills are coming with the net zero plans that Labour have. That is the most important thing, because everything depends on you having that disposable income. And that is why tax is at the heart of this. The pledges that we are making to you on cutting your taxes, and what Labour will not tell you about the taxes they are going to be putting up.
But personal taxes, Penny Mordaunt, are still rising. Overall, they are still rising due to the freezing of income tax thresholds that you've brought in.
Look, we have had some very difficult times. We have had to spend a lot of money on things like furlough. That was the right thing to do, to keep jobs and livelihoods going, not just hand out welfare payments. The pandemic has been expensive, and we've also had terrible global shocks. We've had to step in and pay people's energy bills. But we are coming through that thanks to your efforts. What you need now is disposable income in your pockets. You need taxes.
Lower my rent then, please.
Already, we're making cuts on your taxes,
my wages up.
regarding your home, your pension, work. We need to continue to do that. If you get us, we will reduce your taxes. That's in our DNA as Conservatives. That's not what is in Labour's DNA. They always put up taxes. They're going to put yours up by £2,000. They're going to increase your energy bills, and you're going to get a whole lot of costs with their net zero plans. My constituents cannot afford that.
Okay.
You cannot afford
Penny
that.
Mordaunt, well, I'm going to stop you there. And I'm also going to point out that the top civil servant in the Treasury said that the Conservative document that included the costs that you're referring to went beyond those provided by the civil service. Nigel Farage.
Well, Linda, I have to say, I think this has been one of the worst general election campaigns so far between the two main parties I've ever seen in my lifetime. It isn't just that their leaders are dull, well, very dull in the case of Labour. I mean, sort of Blair without the flair. I mean, the real leader of the Labour Party is here tonight on the stage. At least she's got some personality. We've got Rishi Slippery Sunak. You know, he's fed all the lines to Penny Mordaunt, don't believe any of it. I think it isn't just our public services that are broken. I think our political model is broken. The arguments that are going on the other side of the room here, well, the truth is, they don't really disagree on anything. Fictitious numbers like £2,000, £3,000. And that's why reform have risen so quickly in the polls. There is a sense we need a revolt against this system. We need an electoral system where we get some proportional representation in Parliament.
I agree with Nigel.
We need to break up the current model.
It's hard to disagree with any of this so far.
In Britain, we might just get some real change. What we're being offered, frankly, are two parties promising the earth, and nothing much will change regardless of who gets in. Although I think the breach of trust on manifestos with the Conservatives means they're probably sunk below the waterline. New politics, fresh start. We want a revolt from the British people. That's what I'm after.
Angela Rayner, has Labour gone back on any of its pledges?
Well, to be fair, it's always all about Nigel, and we've had this sort of clown personality before with Boris Johnson, who you talked about the pandemic, Penny, who was
that wasn't very
breaking
clownish,
lockdown
to be fair
rules
to him.
and spending billions of pounds on
I'm going to
money on
remind you of
crony
the question.
contracts.
When
And you
parties
talked
want
about-
your vote, they promise things. When they're elected, none of it gets
Absolutely,
done.
and Linda's absolutely right, and I was coming back to that point because that eroded people's trust. At a time when people wanted the government to do the right thing, they didn't.
Have you ever dropped any pledges?
They disrespected them. And we set out the pledges before the crash. The Tories have crashed the economy. We've been honest in this election. People talked about some of the things that they would like us to do, like the 2-child limit. We have been clear. We will not promise anything that we cannot fund, and we've been absolutely clear.
You could fund it, you're choosing not to.
The Tories have record number of tax hikes on working people of this country. Labour, if we get in, will not put taxes up for working people of this country.
And Labour won't put them up for millionaires
Penny Mordaunt, you've had your say on this.
Has been honest.
Carla,
He said
Carla,
this week
Penny
he is
Mordaunt,
going
thank
to
you.
put your
Carla
taxes
Denyer,
up.
you're next.
He is going to put them up
Penny
by
Mordaunt,
£2,000.
we're going to. I'm stopping
that's
you.
your
Carla
figure.
Denyer.
Thank you.
That's your
Linda, I share your frustration. When I was younger, I had little to no faith that politics had the potential to make the country a better place. But let's remember, politics at its root is about people. It's about people's lives, people's bank accounts, people's future, people's health and happiness. And that's why, after meeting some Green Party members in my 20s, I realised that the Green Party is different. That's why I joined. That's why I got involved. Now, as several of the other panellists have already pointed out, as Labour drop pledge after pledge, policy after policy, slide further and further towards the Conservatives so that you can barely get a cigarette paper between them, the argument for voting for a bit of diversity in the House of Commons becomes ever stronger. And in terms of answering your question, Linda, about parties keeping their promises, the Green Party, when I joined it in 2011, was a pretty small and young party, but we're coming of age. We have increased our number of councillors nearly 5-fold over the last few local elections, and we're grateful to everyone who's put their trust in us.
You should say, I agree with Nigel Farage about proportional representation. Surprise people, say something that we're not expecting you to say. Although, fair enough, it's not bad.
Bring the mantle of the revolt,
They are being lifted out of...
Yeah, we want to be part of that
children
revolt.
in Scotland are being lifted out of poverty thanks to what's called the Scottish Child Payment. It doesn't exist anywhere else on these isles. The SNP has put it into place. Our young people, of course, do not pay a single penny in tuition fees. We've got something which I know the audience in Scotland would love to have, which is a nationalised water company. That
Are there any
delivers clean
pledges?
water.
Are there any pledges you haven't met in government?
The SNP have also delivered nationalised rail, 40% more affordable homes than in England, 70% more than in Wales. And ultimately, it's about keeping our promise to the Scottish people. But I would actually contest. I would say the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are being very honest with you about what the future holds. The problem is, it's £18 billion worth of public sector cuts.
Just not because the question was on pledges.
One of your they're being honest with you. It's just crap.
The attainment gap in a decade between pupils from the richest and most deprived areas of Scotland. Today, it remains considerable.
And indeed, we're making significant progress in relation to that. But of course, poverty and the attainment gap are interlinked. And the levers of power over poverty are determined by Westminster, because all roads do indeed lead back to Westminster.
Rena Pureworth.
I think Linda's question is largely around integrity and the loss of trust. I've been around politics for around 30 years, 20 of that as a journalist. And as a journalist looking from outside, I could see the apathy and I could see the cynicism. You know, the cynicism driven by Downing Street COVID parties. You know, the cynicism driven by a leader of government in Wales accepting a £200,000 payment from a convicted environmental polluter who was looking for planning permission from the government.
Interesting strategy to keep saying you used to be a journalist, because there's only sort of one group of people that the public hate more than politicians, and it's journalists. You know, I hate to admit as one.
It's a redemption story. He's working his way up.
Defying rows between the Conservatives and Labour Party here.
Be a corporate lawyer next.
We have to have honesty about taxation.
Eventually a priest or a doctor.
Forever down and expect to have high levels of public services, can we? And fairness, we have to have a system that protects people like you. Why should Rishi Sunak, on his £2 million income, largely from investments, pay less tax than you do on hard graft going out to work during the day? That's the kind of fairness, or the unfairness, I should say, within the taxation system
and I want to,
that really undermines trust.
I want to get in a word now from Daisy Cooper on this.
We heard promise after promise after promise from the Conservatives at the last general election. 40 new hospitals.
The Lib Dems are the party of broken promises, man. You cannot talk about honesty and going into government and doing something that you didn't promise if you're a Lib Dem.
Scars of 2010, you know, everyone going around with them still.
And of all the things that the Conservatives have broken, the worst thing that I think they've broken is people's hope.
Do you remember going back on the tuition fees pledge?
That's a sore subject for us, for sure. Like that was a very difficult decision. But let's remember that it was the Conservatives who, in 2015, withdrew the maintenance grants for young people from the lowest backgrounds, which has now stopped many of them from going to university. Okay. But my point is that this election is about hope. And it is about change. Many of us do come into politics for the right reason. And for any of you who have seen the party political broadcast by Ed Davey talking about his experiences as a carer for his disabled son, you will be in no doubt that he is in politics for the right reason and that we are committed to fixing the NHS.
Thank you all. And I'm going to go to our next question, which is from Lucy Hobday.
What matters to you more, economic growth or successful climate policy?
Thank you very much, Lucy, for that question. Nigel Farage.
Degrowth question.
Well, it depends what those climate policies are. And at the moment, we're pursuing completely unrealistic climate policies. I mean, the Labour pledge to decarbonise the grid by 2030 will not happen, just as the Conservative pledge to decarbonise the grid by 2035 will not happen. Not only is it impossible, it's actually unaffordable. So we have to be grown up and sensible. If we get new technologies that give us cheaper energy or better ways of manufacturing things, that's great. But what we're doing in this country is we're sacrificing economic growth. We've been massacring British manufacturing. And we say to ourselves, isn't it marvellous? We've reduced carbon emissions more than any other Western country, but we haven't. All we've done is to export carbon emissions when our steel works go to India, or our car manufacture moves to China.
Our emissions are way down. They're slightly higher if you include sort of imported emissions.
Even allowing for that, yes, it's true.
I am saving up a lot of wonky questions for you, James.
On people's electricity bills now for 20 years to pay for very inefficient...
Every claim that's made that I don't know the answer to, I'm just writing it down for you when this is all over.
What's happening with the attempt to deal with climate change, not that we can, because we produce less than 1% of the world's carbon dioxide, and the Chinese are building 80 new coal-fired power stations every year. We should not forget We're going to need oil and gas for the next 30 years. We will be using oil and gas.
Thank you,
in 30
Nigel
years.
Farage. I'm going to turn now to
be sensible
Carla
about
Denyer
what we
next
do.
on
Net
this
zero
topic.
is a bad policy and it's bad for people.
What matters to you more, economic growth or successful climate policy, was the question. Carla Denyer.
Well, Nigel's going to keep your fact checkers busy for a little while. Nigel Farage has been misleading you. I'm an engineer. I used to work in the renewable energy sector. I know very well how wind farms work. So much of what he said there is simply untrue.
Subsidy.
Everyone knows that they can't trust the Conservatives or Reform when it comes to climate, and that's part of the reason why the Conservatives are on their way out at the general election.
Cheapest electricity on the planet.
But what people have been saying to me on the doorsteps in my home city of Bristol and elsewhere is that they're sorely disappointed in the Labour Party too, who've rolled back on their previously flagship climate investment pledge, one of the few good policies they had left, when it's totally clear that we need to tackle the climate crisis and that doing so brings so many other benefits. Insulating our homes, a nationwide home insulation programme will bring down our bills, give us warmer, more comfortable homes.
Let me get Angela Rayner to respond to that. You've dropped that £28 billion a year green investment pledge earlier this year.
Well, we said we won't get to that point, but we will invest in our Green Prosperity Plan because, as Lucy's question was put to us, actually, we do need to look at economic growth, and it's not divorced from also looking at climate policies. We can't ignore the fact that we do have to change. And Nigel says we have to use oil and gas, and you're right, and we've recognised that will be part of the future, but it won't be forever. So we do have to have a green transition, and that's what our Green Prosperity Plan is all about creating those jobs, insulating homes and having our self-reliant energy needs for the future through Great British Energy.
Stephen Flynn, the SNP.
Yeah, I think it's probably worthwhile starting by addressing the question head on. Net zero is economic growth. And it's not GB energy, it's Scotland's energy. It's Scotland's wind, it's Scotland's waves, it's Scotland that's going to provide the carbon capture and storage, and it's Scotland that's going to create the green hydrogen economy of the future. The Americans are investing in it. Europe's
you can't really
investing
claim
in it.
credit for the wind, you know. It's all of our wind. Come on.
I mean, it is quite a windy place.
The opportunities are huge, but we have to grasp them. And I'm afraid that what we're seeing at Westminster is a betrayal of the future generations. The Labour Party walking away from £28 billion worth of investment, which would have been transformative. With the SNP, you will get that commitment to a just transition, to reaching net zero, to protect and create new jobs for the future.
And what does that mean for oil and gas in the North Sea?
And I was actually just going to come to that helpfully enough, because what Angela has said there in relation to oil and gas, so there's three positions at the moment. There's a Conservative Party position that oil and gas is going to exist forever. I'm afraid it's not, and I can say that with some certainty given where, of course, I live. The Labour Party position is to shut down the North Sea oil and gas sector, which would risk 100,000 jobs. Not my numbers, independent experts in what the Unite Union call putting people on the scrap heap. There is a sensible middle ground which allows us to invest in net zero, protect the jobs of tomorrow, and that's what the SNP are focused on.
You weren't in agreement. You didn't want to put a levy on the oil and gas companies.
That's not true, Angela.
We talked about a transition.
You're talking about people lying, and that's not true.
We recognise that we need a transition from oil and gas, and that's what the Green Prosperity Plan is all about. And that's why that's why we put the levy on oil and gas companies to then have Great British Energy, which will give us the jobs for the future, hundreds of thousands of jobs across the UK, including in Scotland, where Great British Energy's headquarters will be based under a Labour government.
I'm going to now turn to Daisy Cooper.
If I may address that directly, because it was pointed towards me, that we should not be grateful in Scotland for a headquarters. It is our energy. 100,000 jobs are on the line as a result of your policy.
And there will be more jobs. There will be more jobs in Scotland under our plan. There will be more jobs than 100,000 in Scotland under Labour.
Can we bring Daisy Cooper in now? Thanks.
The Conservatives have moved the goalposts on climate targets. And what's that done is that has brought uncertainty to the heart of business and people who want to invest in our country and our climate transition. We are facing a climate and ecological emergency, but we don't have to make a choice between economic growth and tackling the climate emergency. We can do both, hand in hand. We really can. So take the example of having a home insulating scheme, an emergency home insulating scheme. That would not only reduce our energy usage, which would be good for the climate, it would reduce our energy bills, which would be good for our pocket, but it would also create a huge raft of new jobs as well, people who could actually go around insulating our homes. So we can do both of them hand in hand, and that's precisely what we need to do.
Okay. Rena Pureworth.
That was better communicated
more important than
Labour
looking
managed
after
on
the
that.
environment that you will be living in future. There is not a matter of making a choice in Wales, as it happens. We can create that economic prosperity that we need to build a brighter future for our country, hand in hand with looking after the environment. It is why Plaid Cymru calls for the devolution of the Crown Estate, as has happened to Scotland, but they won't do it to Wales, so that we can invest in making the most of our natural resources, in extracting power out of the wind and the tide. It's why we need to see Wales being paid the £4 billion that is owed of the investment in HS2 rail in England. Wales is contributing towards that, even though there's not a mile of that railway in Wales. And we need that in order to drive people onto public transport through investing in connectivity in Wales. And you know what? I'm not surprised hearing the Conservatives refusing to make that commitment to Wales, but it's galling when you have a Labour government in Wales that Labour won't either.
Penny Mordaunt.
Done well, both should help the other. What is critical, though, is if you want to reach net zero by 2050, you have to do it with people. You have to ensure that people can afford to get there. If you don't do that, you will fail to reach your targets. We are going to do this at a pace that people can afford. 2050 sounds a long way off, and in this election, you're looking at the next 5 years. At the end of this parliament, if they get in, you will not be able to buy a petrol car. If your boiler goes, you'll have to spend tens of thousands of pounds on a new heat pump, other things that need to be done to your home to convert it. My constituents cannot afford that. You heard about
because of your
GB
policies.
Energy. You heard about GB Energy. This is an energy company that your money is going to be put into that doesn't produce any energy at all. It doesn't produce a jot of energy. Oil and gas. This is the insanity of Labour's policy. They are expecting a load of people to invest in oil and gas at the same time saying they're not going to expand the sector. So they're not going to get the money in. And the final thing, if you do this too fast, all you do is destroy our supply chain. We should be building supply chains in this country to produce batteries, to do all sorts of things.
Let's get Angela to
speed Labour are planning.
Let Angela respond.
What happened to British Volt?
And that will kill off economic growth.
Let's hear the response.
I mean, it's astonishing.
How much energy is it going to produce?
It's astonishing because the Tories have been in power now 14 years.
How much energy is Great British Energy going to produce?
And we haven't had an industrial strategy or a manufacturing sector in the UK that is about
just said it's going to produce energy.
We're just listening to you, Penny.
I think it's pretty important. You're flogging an energy company to these guys. You're expecting them to put their money in.
She's mid-response. Let's hear it.
Thank you. Great British Energy will be an owned company by the UK taxpayers that will bring energy, clean energy, to the country, which will bring down bills and give people good, skilled jobs. We've heard from the Tories for 14 years that they were going to do something about skills and manufacturing in this country. I asked the people to look at their record, and they
most of my questions for you, James, are about Great British Energy. We're going to talk a lot about Great British Energy when this is all over.
Do that, when really the reason they say that is their 14 years
You've had your warning.
Abstract failure.
And are your green policies going to be
You have failed the British people.
Are your green policies
You have
going to be in
failed
your
the British
manifesto?
people, and people can see that.
Because you currently can't afford to pay for them.
Our
That's where that
manifesto,
£2,000 comes from,
Green
that you're going to have to pay.
And I'm going to turn to
on their green policies, and they're going to hit you on the cost.
And I'm going to turn to the next question at this point.
Don't take my yawn as any indication that I'm bored of this debate. Let's listen to the next question.
The next question. Let's get the next question. It's from Nick O'Donnell.
As a father with a young son about to start secondary school, I'm concerned about him going out on his own. I'm particularly worried about knife crime. How will the parties make sure he's safe?
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Donnell. So how will the parties protect future generations like Nick O'Donnell's young son who's about to start secondary school? Carla Denyer.
Nick, we all have the right to feel safe in our homes and on our streets. My home city of Bristol has seen an epidemic of knife crime. One of my colleagues' friends was one of those victims, so this strikes very close to home for me. There are obvious things that could be done in terms of making sure that there's more officers out and about. But the other parties will also, I expect, tell you that they'll be tough on crime.
How many more police officers would you want as you've brought policing into it?
Our manifesto will be out soon, but the broad points I can cover now. Tough on crime is a rhetoric that we hear a lot from other parties, but the reality is that not all crime can be tackled by being tough. And that's something that the Green councillors in Bristol, the largest council in the country that's Green-led, are prioritising. Because the causes of knife crime are complex, but they include the fact that a generation of young people are growing up without access to the services they need. Youth centres are being closed, services that they need to support them.
Okay. The question specifically on knife crime, which is up in England and Wales by 8% since 2019. Nigel Farage, how would you protect?
Stop and search. We know the areas in which knives are most prevalent. Stop and search. And of course, we don't do it. Oh gosh, if this area has got a high proportion of people from the black and ethnic minority communities, they might call us racist. We've got to stop doing this. We've got to completely forget the colour of people's skins, treat everybody equally, but we must do stop and search. We must do it in a very, very tough way. We have to have proper sentences. And it's but one area, isn't it? I mean, you can go shoplifting now, any of you. You can go out and nick up to 200 quid's worth without being prosecuted. We are seeing a decline, a societal decline of law and order in this country. And frankly, government and the police forces have been too scared to do what needs to be done.
It's very scaremongering. Crime is going down. It's been going down for a very long time. Although, I mean, it is kind of stabilising now.
It feels like Farage is off the leash, rather, doesn't it?
Really very scared.
He actually gets more right-wing during elections, I think.
Children.
Remember the whole HIV immigrants thing in 2015?
Home counties on county lines, there's a big issue with knives as well. I think we need to change the model of policing, and we need to get back to good old-fashioned community policing, where the police know their communities, where the communities know their police, where community groups, where faith groups, where local families all work together and they get their intelligence from the ground up. That's been all but wiped out in parts of our country. There's been cuts of 4,500 PCSOs as well. And let me say about stop and search in particular. Stop and search can be a useful tool in some circumstances, but suspicionless stop and search, which has been used to target particular groups of people, is not valid and should not be used. So where there is a suspicion of somebody, it can be used, but it has to be used in a targeted way based on evidence, not on profiling. Nigel Farage?
We do know the areas in which knife crime is the most prevalent, and there is no question.
Nigel Farage in defence of profiling.
If there's a high,
which is why tackling inequality is an important part of the answer.
That may be what you have to do to solve the problem ultimately, by giving people equality of opportunity.
Do we not want to solve the problem ultimately? Is that not the point?
But you can't give people equality of outcome. We're scared of our own shadow here. We're not going to deal with the question unless we stop being scared of ourselves.
Okay.
We go out and do what needs to be done.
Penny Mordaunt, how would you protect future generations from knife crime?
Well, over the last 14 years, if you leave out computer crime and online fraud, we have more than halved crime, 55%. And we have now a record number of police. Violent crime is down by 44%, but we have hotspots and knife crime in particular. London is top of the list. We have put more police on the streets. We have met our manifesto commitment of 20,000 more police officers. We have record numbers.
It was only after they cut 20,000, right? So lots of experienced police officers have been replaced by lots of inexperienced police officers.
West Midlands has the highest rate of knife crime.
Absolutely.
And
that's a Labour police crime commissioner.
That did until recently have a Conservative mayor.
If you are in, but he wasn't responsible for police. There was a police crime commissioner, and it was Labour. If you live in a Labour area, you are 40% more likely to be a victim of crime. That is a shocking statistic. We need more police, and we need
correlation
police who
issue,
are
isn't it?
embedded in
I mean, Labour
communities.
represent poorer areas, and poorer areas have more crime.
If kids are doing stuff, they follow up with the school, they follow up with the parents. That's what Conservative police crime commissioners are doing. In Hampshire, we've got 600 extra officers. Every single one of my wards has a named Bobby. People know, build up intelligence. That is how we get crime down, and we have got it down by 55%.
Angela Rayner?
Well, Nick, thanks for the question. And I think our young people don't feel safe either at the moment, never mind us as parents. And I say that I've got a 15 and 16-year-old sons at home. And I think it's really sad when I go around my schools and I talk to young people, they're frightened on the street. Penny talked about 20,000 police officers. They cut 22,000. That's a minus 2,000 in my mathematics. So they haven't protected.
That's not true. We've got a record number of police officers.
We have seen the decimation of our neighbourhood policing. And actually, when police are in the neighbourhoods, they get to know the young people. They can work with them, and we can really get our young people feeling safe on the streets again. Because I think that is one of the real scandals at the moment, is our young people feel that they will be protected if they carry a knife. That is completely untrue, and we've got to educate them and make them feel safe again.
Rena Pureworth.
Penny Mordaunt was referring to some areas having higher levels of crime than others. Let's be straight about it. It's areas which are suffering most poverty that will suffer the highest levels of crime. It is people who have less hope who are most likely to end up leading criminal lives. I absolutely agree that we need to look back through the education system. We have to make it very, very clear to our young people that there can be zero tolerance on knives. I was attacked as a teenager. Luckily, no knives. My son was attacked a couple of years ago. Again, luckily, no knives involved. But it makes me too very, very worried about the future for young people. But for us in Wales, what's absolutely key is that we bring the decision-making closer to communities such as yours, so that we can see the devolving of justice and policing, so that we can devise systems that work for Wales. Angela's Labour colleagues in Wales agree with me on that. Again, Labour at a UK level, hoping to become the next government, say no chance.
Briefly, Carla, before I turn to Stephen Flynn.
I've signed the Citizens UK pledge for a counsellor in every school to help with young people's mental health and with youth violence.
Good idea.
Will the others on the panel today join me?
Well, we already committed that we'd have mental health services in schools. That's one of our commitments.
Stephen Flynn, on the broader question of policing, police officer numbers in Scotland are at the lowest level since 2008. Now, police in Scotland are not investigating every low-level crime.
And thankfully, of course, Nick, in relation to your direct question, if I remember the figures correctly, serious knife crime in Scotland is comparatively low compared with many other areas. Now, that's not to be complacent, because as a dad, I share your concerns. I worry about what the future holds for my kids. But ultimately, the solution lies in what Reen has said. What we need to do is make sure that we are investing in the areas that need support the most. Poverty is a major driver behind this, and Westminster has failed generations of young people by not providing them with the hope for a better future, so they turn to violence when they perhaps shouldn't. And I think that's something we should all reflect upon going into this general election, where £18 billion of public sector cuts are coming down the line, and a future Labour government has no answers.
But this question was about how the parties are going to protect future generations, like Nick O'Donnell's son. How can he feel confident of that if someone in a similar position in Scotland see the police not investigating every crime?
Well, of course, as I've already outlined, as I understand it to be the case, serious knife crime instances in Scotland are comparatively
the police
low
not investigating low-level shoplifting isn't exactly going to encourage people to do knife crime. I think I'm not really sure I follow the logic.
Into government, again, if I understand correctly, but there's a wider picture to be had here, and that means police officers working with local communities, working with schools, working with our young people to offer them hope and optimism for the future. And I'm afraid that Westminster doesn't offer that hope and optimism right now.
Okay. Nigel Farage.
Yeah, look, again, I just think our whole approach to crime is wrong. Low-level crime is rapidly growing. Street-level crime is rapidly growing. And the old theories about New York and how it was cleaned up, it was if you deal with the stuff at the bottom, i.e. people carrying knives, shoplifting, graffiti, broken windows, you might just deal with the more serious stuff. I think we also should add into all of this the blight of drugs and drug gangs in our cities. That whole culture, it has been absolutely disastrous, and nobody has yet found the answer to that.
Okay, well, that was our final questions. So I'm going to thank you all for your responses, to all of those here in the audience who have shared their questions with us. But it is time now to go to the party's final thoughts. And for that, they have been given 30 seconds for a final thought from each of them. And the order of those final thoughts, those final statements, was chosen earlier by lot. So let us go to the first of those, and it's from Angela Rayner.
After 14 years of chaos, it's time for change. Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party. Our fully costed plan for Britain will secure our economy, will bring down NHS waiting times with 40,000 new appointments every week, and will secure our borders, not with gimmicks, but with a credible plan to smash the gangs. We'll create Great British Energy, bringing down bills and creating thousands of well-paid jobs. We'll boost neighbourhood police to tackle antisocial behaviour, and we'll hire 6,500 new teachers. So if you want change, vote Labour.
Stephen Flynn.
The Tories are finished, so the choice is simple. Who do voters best trust to put Scotland's interests first in Westminster? Now, in the SNP, we know what it is that we believe in. Investment in our NHS, action on the cost of living crisis, rejoining the European single market, and creating economic growth by delivering on net zero. Unlike the Labour Party, we will never, ever get comfortable with the Westminster status quo, and we will always fight for Scotland's right to choose its own future. So on the 4th of July, vote to put Scotland's interests first. Vote SNP.
Carla Denyer.
We can all see the Tories are toast, thank goodness. But we deserve better than a Labour Party that is offering more of the same. Angela says that Keir has changed the Labour Party, and she's right. He's changed them into the Conservatives. Frankly, our children deserve better. The Green Party is on the cusp of breaking through in seats up and down the country. Green MPs will never stop defending our future, protecting our NHS from privatisation and pushing the next Labour government to do better. We deserve real hope and real change. Vote Green.
Rena Pureworth.
This evening, I've been able to stand up for Wales, yes, but also for a different kind of politics that hopefully has been able to feel relevant wherever you are. My vision is a positive one. This isn't as good as it gets. The Conservatives are gone. They are finished, and it can't come quickly enough. But there is a real chance here to send Labour a message too. Stop taking Wales for granted. It is true that communities throughout the UK feel as if they are being ignored. Well, I won't let Wales be. So vote Plaid Cymru on the 4th of July.
Penny Mordaunt.
We've come through tough times, and now there is
This is very stern.
You can choose Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer and get higher taxes, higher bills, and have your pension raided. Or you can stick with us and the plan that is working. We will cut your taxes. It's not working for anyone. We will protect your pension, and we will defend this nation. For a more secure future, vote Conservative.
The Tory, they found one.
Daisy Cooper.
That was terrifying.
Our country is crying out for change. And it's not hard to see
Big
why.
mood change there.
Under this Conservative government, everything feels broken. Nothing works. Under Ed Davey's leadership, the Liberal Democrats will fix our NHS and social care, tackle the cost of living crisis, and put an end to the scandal of filthy raw sewage being dumped in our rivers and streams. Every vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for a fair deal and a vote to help deliver the change that we all so desperately want and need.
Give it another 20 years.
Unlike the other 6, I don't need an altar queue. I'm here because I believe in what I believe in. Our politics isn't working. You've heard these pathetic arguments tonight between the two big parties. Really, there isn't much difference. But electorally, Labour are going to win. The debate is who forms the opposition in the next parliament? Who fights for the rights of ordinary British people? Who fights to control our borders? Who fights for men and women running small businesses? Reform UK is about to become a political phenomenon, an historic one. So I urge you, join the revolt.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And with that, we ended. That is it from the BBC election debate, from all of us here in the Radio Theatre, our audience. And thank you to all the politicians who took part. Thank you for being with us. Good night.
Thank you for watching that with us. We're going to go on to some analysis of what you just saw before that. 10K of you watching. We are funded entirely by our audience. If you want to help support our election coverage, go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description. Actually, before we go to analysis, we're going to look at some of the notable moments from that debate, the highlights, as it were. Here is Penny Mordaunt trying to defend Sunak over the story that dominated headlines today, the PM ditching D-Day commemorations.
What happened was completely wrong, and the Prime Minister has rightly apologised for that, apologised to veterans, but also to all of us, because he was representing all of us. I'm from Portsmouth. I've also been Defence Secretary, and my wish at the end of this week is that all of our veterans feel completely treasured. And I'm hoping tonight to convince you of some things that are important to them, important to their legacy. And I couldn't do that if I wasn't straight with you on that issue.
Would you have left D-Day early?
I didn't go to D-Day. I think what happened was very wrong. I think the Prime Minister has apologised for that.
Such an amazing way to have to start a election debate. You have to apologise for what the Prime Minister has done and say what he did was very wrong. Not even very wrong. Apart from that incredibly scary outro, I do think Penny Mordaunt did okay with the material she had. And let's face it, it's very, very poor material. To be fair, not much of the debate was about Rishi Sunak missing D-Day. So I suppose that might have been a slight bit of relief for Penny Mordaunt.
Well, she kind of, as you said, given the material she was given, she did the best with it that you could do. They seem to have stepped up their rhetoric from wrong in Rishi Sunak's statement to very wrong by the time you get to Penny Mordaunt. Maybe it'll be extremely wrong if this one rumbles on into the distance. There's actually probably not that much you can say about this. Like, it was obviously disrespectful. It was obviously very wrong, as Penny Mordaunt said. And it was obviously kind of politically stupid. And you feel like there's only so far you can go sort of saying this before you want to get anything else out of that one. There is a question about why it happened. Why or how on earth the decision was put in train that this would be what Rishi Sunak was going to do. You start to suspect, if you were putting on your conspiracy hat on earlier, Michael, I might borrow it, and you start to think is the reform sleeper cell working inside number 10 Downing Street that sort of makes these things happen. It was a bizarre thing to do. But you're right, Penny Mordaunt was offered not very much to work with and did the best she could under the circumstances. But that said, I think the two main parties came off worse out of the whole thing that evening. It was not particularly edifying to have the two of them basically trading blows over a kind of made-up number from the Tories and going backwards and forwards in a completely unedifying fashion.
Yeah, to be fair, you can see why the party leaders didn't want to turn up, because the format is not favourable to the main two parties, especially with them sort of standing next to each other in the corner. It was like they were constantly bickering, and then you went to the other parties to say something more meaningful, like it or loathe it. So that, I disagreed with Nigel Farage most of the time, but he did get to sort of put forward a concrete point every now and again. And then actually, I suppose, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but having four people on the stage, basically all pitching to the left of Labour, was quite interesting. It definitely did make it a more, left-wing debate than we're used to. James was just talking there about sort of parties bickering over tax. Let's look at a Barney between Labour's Angela Rayner and the Tory Penny Mordaunt.
We have got to cut people's taxes, and we have got to alleviate burdens on business. Angela Rayner and the Labour Party, Keir Starmer confirmed this earlier this week, they are going to put up your taxes by £2,000.
That's a lie.
By £2,000 per working household.
Penny, your government have raised taxes to the record level in 70 years.
Yeah,
the last
we have, and we've
26
hated putting taxes up. We have now been cutting taxes. We will continue to cut taxes. The country can afford it.
You're using £2,000 Penny Mordaunt, you're using a figure that's been criticised by the UK Statistics Watchdog.
Costings and Labour's
Why don't you stand by your
numbers?
record?
And you'll see
record
it.
levels of
You'll see
taxes
it.
on working people.
Well,
26 separate tax hikes in the last Parliament.
About 12 new taxes
That's
that
rubbish.
Labour are going to bring in. It's
Absolute
not
rubbish. We've
Well, what is it then?
absolutely guaranteed we will not
how are
raise
you gonna
taxes
close
for
that
working
gap?
people in this
How
country.
are you going to close that gap? £2,000 per working household. Which policies are you going to take out of your manifesto?
We've been
Which ones
clear
are you
how
ditching?
we would pay for our
No, you
manifesto.
haven't.
Okay, it's time.
It's
Time to hear from the others. Angela Rayner, it's time to hear from the others. Carla Denyer.
Well, that was terribly dignified, wasn't it?
It's a good line from Carla Denyer. I don't think many people watching that will have any fucking clue what's going on there at all. It was very unedifying. So these 12 taxes that Penny Mordaunt was referring to there, this was actually in a Guardian article, which was sort of saying, how are Labour going to pay for this? And they'd got a briefing saying that Rachel Reeves in her first budget is sort of going to say, look, the economy is an absolute mess. This is an emergency budget. And without breaking any of their manifesto pledges, so without raising income tax or VAT or national insurance, they will find sort of 12 smaller taxes that they can levy that will add up to a big number. So I'm not sure that Penny Mordaunt was completely making that up. The £2,000 figure does seem to be pretty much made up. It's definitely not an objective number. The Tories did really get caught out lying on that one. As I say, good quip from Carla Denyer. Let's go and have a look at what she went on to say.
You don't have to be an economist to see that our economy is not working for the majority of people. Penny is talking about a cost of living crisis, and yes, of course, that's what it is, but you might more accurately describe it as an inequality crisis, because actually some people in this country have been doing very, very well. Some people got substantially wealthier during the pandemic, while many of the rest of us struggled. It doesn't have to be like this. We could have well-paid jobs, secure jobs, and a welfare system that really acts as the safety net we need to catch people when they fall. A green economy would create jobs, well-paid jobs distributed all over the country, for example, on a nationwide home insulation programme, which would bring down everyone's bills, help with the cost of living in the here and now, give us warmer, more comfortable homes, create hundreds of thousands of green jobs, and support local businesses. And the Greens would provide a real safety net, starting with a £15 minimum wage for all ages, removing the ageist cap on young working adults, an immediate uplift to universal credit, and my final point, removing the cruel two-child benefit cap that both the Conservatives and Labour's party support, even though it holds 250,000 children down into poverty.
Thank you, Carla Denyer.
James, we'll talk about Carla Denyer in a moment. First of all, I introduced you as wonk extraordinaire on this stream. Who's chatting the most crap on tax? I mean, in this sort of bickering between Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt, can you sort of decode it for us?
I mean, probably the Tories are talking more obvious rubbish about this simply because actually it is true that taxes have gone up for a large number of people, mostly because of this business with the thresholds for different rates of tax you pay, something that Nigel Farage flagged, not moving in line with people's pay going up in line with inflation, broadly speaking. So you end up with a lot more people paying higher rates of tax than used to, and that means the tax bill has gone up on the sly somewhat over a period of time. The £2,000 figure, I start to lose sight of where these things come from. The Treasury, senior civil servant at the Treasury popped up to say, don't claim this is a Treasury figure. It's not. It's something you cobble together yourself. Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator, a fine journal I'm sure many Novara media viewers read regularly, said that, well, if we apply the same methodology to the Tories, we've come to a figure of £3,000 of tax rises that they're going to have to do. It's kind of nonsensical. The really big issue here is the one that the SNP were raising in particular and hammered as one of their talking points, is that as things stand, the budget that was passed last year with Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor lines up a load of cuts, and I thought it was more like £20 billion by the time you get to the end of 5 years, a year for public services, and neither Tories nor Labour are really talking about what they're going to actually do with this, because if you cut taxes, those cuts are definitely going to happen, or you just let borrowing explode. I mean, you could do that if you want. Labour have said they're not going to let borrowing go up very much, so what are they going to cut? If they're not going to cut, they're going to have to put up taxes.
Carla Denyer, how did you think she performed in that debate?
I actually thought she did very well as like she was good at sort of jumping on points and finding points to intervene against some of the other people speaking. You could see that, the aim of all the smaller parties really was to find that point at which you could say something that makes you look different. Actually, to be honest with you, with Labour and Tory sort of bickering over basic made up figures, it becomes a bit easier. She got a laugh at least, and not many other people. In fact, possibly no one else other than Nigel Farage managed to actually do that at one point. Some good lines there. So that was her personal bit that she managed to get across. If you look at what she was saying that wasn't quite so robust, in particular, first answer around defence, it feels like, although the Greens are not the party they might have been some years ago, that they're much more sort of professional in their operation. They're much more approaching things as a national party and thinking about government, all that sort of thing. It still feels a little bit like they're not quite at the point of saying, we are genuinely a national party that has things to say on all of these areas, rather than sort of hand-waving and say, never mind talking about defence, let's talk about climate change. Right? You have to have a proper answer for something like that, rather than saying, yeah, but the army thinks climate change is a serious problem, and the army do. But as you said, what the army going to do about it? Not so much. So you need to get back to talking about what you're going to do about the army. So that was where it was weakest, I think, for her. But overall, like all the smaller parties, they had a much better time of it.
And I think one person who stood out, especially at the beginning, I think I wasn't noticing him so much in the second half of the debate, but Stephen Flynn had some standout moments, I think, in the first half, and he got the first round of applause of the evening.
As someone who was under the care of the NHS from the age of 14 to 32, because I was a disabled man, and I physically wouldn't be standing here today but wasn't for the wonderful treatment that I received from the NHS. I know what it is to live in chronic pain, and I know what it is to have that chronic pain removed. And it's only thanks to the NHS that happened, which is why in Scotland we don't just have record funding, we don't just have the best paid nursing staff, we don't have no strikes, we don't have a single NHS strike in Scotland. And of course we do have some of the best performing NHS levels in Scotland as well. It's also important to remind everyone in this audience the difference between the SNP and the Westminster parties, because in SNP-controlled Scotland, you wouldn't pay a single penny in tuition fees for your studies. What a difference that would make to your education and your future.
That was very popular. I mean, as I say, the audience did seem fairly reasonable when it came to, issues of migration, issues of tuition fees. Obviously, getting rid of tuition fees is popular among the country. I mean, the 2017 Labour manifesto was very popular, very common sense. Did get a bit wackier by 2019, but I suppose the audience were very Labour 2017, I think. And lots of people did vote for Labour in 2017. The state of the NHS, in England at least, is the responsibility of the Tories. When pushed on it, though, Penny Mordaunt made a pretty bizarre pivot.
We have to keep the budget strong. You need a strong economy to do that, and public spending is going to go up. It will go up, and for the NHS, very substantially. The only people on this platform who have ever cut the NHS budget are Labour. In Wales, they've cut it 4 times, and that's why their waiting lists are 4 times longer than they are in England.
NHS funding is going down when you account for ageing and inflation.
A Labour government, the NHS can't afford it either. But the second thing we also need to do is increase the number of healthcare professionals we have. We have been doing that. We have 70,000 more nurses, for example. But we need to retain people in the service. We've got to take the stress off people, but we also have to remove barriers to them continuing
You do
in service.
acknowledge, don't you, that the pandemic is not completely part of waiting lists. They were rising
Senior
before.
nurses and doctors is going to get healthcare professionals to leave the service. That is going to lead to more waiting lists.
That's rubbish. And you've just said that we need a strong economy. You backed Liz Truss and crashed our economy. You made people like me redundant when we were in the home care service.
Even Liz Truss, on her worst day, still recognised that we need a nuclear deterrent in this country, Angela.
And so do I.
And
so do I.
But your sides do not add up.
So you had to. I mean, I think we knew the Labour pivot there, which is, to constantly talk about Liz Truss crashing the economy. And I think people, we get frustrated about it because many of the issues that sort of Liz Truss immediately caused kind of would have happened anyway. The Bank of England sort of say, well, interest rates aren't much higher than they would have been if it wasn't for her. And Labour are using this argument essentially to say we've got to be fiscally conservative. But in the public's mind, you can see why Labour strategists are saying, mention Liz Truss all the time. I didn't really expect, to. I mean, it was an impressive pivot if what you were looking for is a pivot, because it was an imaginative one. But Penny Mordaunt saying, at least Liz Truss wanted to keep the nuclear deterrent. Was it? Do you think that worked?
I mean, it's not. Yeah, God, you can see where you're going. Yeah, well, that was the other completely ludicrous spectacle of basically the two main parties yelling to each other about who would press the button or not. It's and it's refreshing to see an alternative presented from the rest along the lines of precisely actually as the SNP and Plaid both said, which is spending on conventional defence is a smarter move than spending an absolute fortune on nuclear weapons, and then having this sort of slightly ridiculous, vote Labour, get Vladimir Putin to invade line that Penny Mordaunt was coming out with. It's a mark of desperation from the Tories that they don't, I mean, not stating the obvious, right? They don't actually have very much to say, because it's a car crash. If you look at what's happened over the last few years in particular, they have nothing really to speak of there. And it's falling back very much into the absolute baseline of what you can possibly say as a Conservative Party to people who might just about manage to vote for you, which is that we will press the button and we will cut your taxes. And that's it. There's nothing else in the thing.
We won't tax pensioners, and we're more than willing to kill millions of people in other countries, even if it means that we'll get nuked in return. Let's go to some super chats. Hey, with a $5 says, thank you for this sassy viewing party, Novara. It's the most fun I've had watching an electoral debate. Well, thank you. Hey, with your kind of sassy name. Welshy Jim. Amazing coverage tonight. Many congrats to everyone at Novara for it. Love being able to interact with other viewers while watching the debate. It's always very lively in the comments this evening. And Stephen Jackson, Plaid and SNP smashing it. Pretty clear Lab and Tories are the losers here. Terrible answers. Shame Carla Denia isn't doing better. I thought she did kind of fine. Thelma with a tenner, thank you so much. With all my heart, I genuinely appreciate Novara's support for the trans community. I'm on the verge of abandoning the country. Novara gives me some small hope that all is not lost. Thank you for that very kind donation, a very moving comment. That was an issue that didn't... We're actually going to talk sort of in a moment about sort of the issues that should have come up that didn't. You might be on the same page as me, where I'm thinking the trans issues not coming up is probably a good thing, because whenever they're sort of discussed on a stage such as that, it normally degenerates into something rather unpleasant quite quickly. You mentioned, or someone mentioned there, Stephen Flynn doing well. Let's go to another sort of strong moment from him. And this was in response to a question from an audience member that linked problems in the NHS and other public services to migration levels.
Any voter in Scotland who wants to impact our economy, impact our NHS, should vote for the parties who want to cut migration, which is the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and Nigel Farage. And this is a consequence of us being led down the garden path by the right wing in British politics for far too long. We need to stand against it. We need to promote our economy, promote our public services, and to do so by promoting migration.
It's interesting. James, I mean, the SNP are always very bold on migration. It's quite interesting because they don't control it. They don't have any power whatsoever in Scotland over migration levels. So it's, I was always wondering, when there was that situation where it was in Glasgow, I think, wasn't it, where there was sort of people blocking an immigration van, picking someone up. And the SNP were actually quite sort of in favour of the people blocking the van. And I was like, if they were in government, they presumably would also deport people. That's kind of what every government does. So I always wonder with the SNP if it's very easy to be that pro-migration when you're never ever going to control it.
I don't think so. I think there's a little bit more to it because partly because they've built up a sort of, in terms of the core of what the SNP says, it's as a kind of a liberal, centre-left liberal party that is the sensible managers of Scotland as a progressive country versus the barbarians down south, in Westminster, which is a large element of truth. I mean, just comparing the chats, the argument of migration that Tory and Labour having versus what the SNP was saying, there's not actually mad to sort of try and claim something like this. Actual attitude and migration between England and Scotland, at least, if you go and look at the polling, aren't really that different. So a lot of this is kind of the SNP self-image and what they want to say about themselves. And that, by the way, that applies to a whole swathe of things. It's not the case that Scotland is noticeably more left-wing than the rest of the country. It just has a different political system, different parties operating inside of it. And as a few people pointed out, although I think Nigel Farage was the first one to really raise it, once you get electoral reform, fossilized systems like we have in Westminster start to break up, and you get a bit more genuine choice, genuine debate. I mean, it was refreshing, actually, to hear that range of different options being presented there, including, in its way, Nigel Farage going full tilt Thatcherite on the NHS and a few other right-wing talking points that he was really pursuing out there. You get the range of different opinion. You have an actual substantive debate of some sort, rather than two virtually identical propositions from either party yelling over whether £2,000 or £3,000 is your preferred made-up number to throw at the other one.
I think that's very well put. You mentioned Nigel Farage and electoral reform. We're going to show you a clip. Apologies for saying this. It's Nigel Farage, and it's both somewhat entertaining and somewhat persuasive.
I have to say, I think this has been one of the worst general election campaigns so far between the two main parties I've ever seen in my lifetime. It isn't just that their leaders are dull, very dull in the case of Labour. I mean, sort of Blair without the flair. I mean, the real leader of the Labour Party is here tonight on the stage. At least she's got some personality. We've got Rishi Slippery Sunak. He's fed all the lines to Penny Mordaunt. Don't believe any of it. I think it isn't just our public services that are broken. I think our political model is broken. The arguments that are going on the other side of the room here, when the truth is, they don't really disagree on anything. Fictitious numbers like £2,000, £3,000. And that's why reform have risen so quickly in the polls. There is a sense we need a revolt against this system. We need an electoral system where we get some proportional representation in Parliament. We need to break up the current model. And if we get a new kind of politics in Britain, we might just get some real change. What we're being offered, frankly, are two parties promising the earth, and nothing much will change regardless of who gets in. Although I think the breach of trust on manifestos with the Conservatives means they're probably sunk below the waterline. New politics, fresh start. We want a revolt from the British people. That's what I'm after.
A revolt from the British people. I suppose, James, from what you've said about this debate, it's nice having these different opinions on there. It's kind of a good argument for electoral reform, isn't it? Because the sort of physical manifestation of a two-party system is Keir Starmer versus Rishi Sunak on stage, like two really dull people, all like really small c conservative in the sense of both sort of really trying to appeal to this one median voter in a particular constituency, and just trying to avoid every other issue. And you compare that to this debate where you had 7 different parties. They're all sort of willing to offend some people because they're all going for their own constituency, but it's just much more interesting. I wonder if that's sort of an argument that is going to start to be more attractive to the British public.
Well, I hope so. I mean, look, support for electoral reform is rising anyway, pretty much as support for the two main parties has fallen over the years, with some exceptions. I mean, 2017 and this sudden reversion to the two main parties was quite a dramatic moment. And in 2019, the Tories sort of held on to that, and all sorts of upsets between those two elections. I don't think it's going to happen this time around. I think the main parties are not going to get particularly big votes in absolute terms, and turnout overall is probably going to be down. And I think there's going to be a number of smaller parties actually creep through. I think it's quite likely that Carla Denyer will win in Bristol. I mean, this is what the best polling we have says in this. They may or may not hold on also to Brighton. Nigel Farage on the MRP could win, it seems, in Clacton. So there's sort of things happening under the surface there that electoral reform would bring to the top. The other bit that Nigel Farage is doing, and that was probably his best single answer in all of that, not just because I think both of us kind of agreed with about 90% of it or something. It's that it was his strongest single point, which is that I am standing against what are two establishment candidates from the establishment parties, and we're going to do something different. The Greens could be tapping into something like that, but I didn't quite see them doing it. What you see instead is them doing a slightly more convincing version of the Lib Dems. Right? A lot of the stuff that the Lib Dems were saying, the Greens were saying with more conviction, because they didn't, as you kept saying yourself, didn't have that legacy of actually being in government and actually driving through the worst cuts to public spending since the 1930s. Right? That's on the Lib Dems. They could have walked away from it. They didn't. It's on them, not on the Greens. So they can do a better version of Lib Dems from that point of view when it's the left-wing Lib Dems. But if you want to get beyond that point, you have to also get some of that Nigel Farage, we're against the establishment, we're going to offer you something different. And that's a bit that I didn't see coming from Carla Denyer particularly, and I'm not sure if the Greens are tapping into it effectively as yet.
That's true. That's a very good point about Carla Denny. She's not very good at populism, but maybe it's because she's not populist, right? There's the kind of left technocrats, aren't they? Which I suppose does have a appeal, but it has an appeal to a very specific group of people, potentially sort of liberalish graduates, which is why you can do quite well in Bristol. But maybe if they want to have a more general sort of also, they want to be able to sort of surprise people a bit more and, inject a little bit of populism. I think she should have said, I agree with Nige at that point. That would have been very interesting. You mentioned the Lib Dems. We talked a lot about Penny Mordaunt having some pretty poor material to work with. The Lib Dems, she had better material to work with on policy, but there was a question where, as a Lib Dem, you're always going to struggle. Can your party be trusted to deliver on promises?
We heard promise after promise after promise from the Conservatives at the last general election. 40 new hospitals, 6,000 GPs, and all the rest. And the fact is that this Parliament has been characterised by law-breaking, by lying, and by the economic illiteracy of the mini-budget. And of all the things that the Conservatives have broken, the worst thing that I think they've broken is people's hope.
Do you remember going back on the tuition fees pledge?
That's a sore subject for us, for sure. That was a very difficult decision.
You got no answer to that. Everyone in the room knows it as well. Such a catastrophic. Apparently, we've probably said this on the show before, but apparently Nick Clegg, I almost forgot his name. He's been out of British politics for so long. Has a much better paid job at Facebook, probably more powerful job at Facebook, actually. The director of corporate affairs or whatever, or public affairs. Nick Clegg was apparently offered by George Osborne to say, you don't have to vote for this tuition fee rise. I know it's a very sore subject for you. Do you want to abstain? And he said, nope, we're a grown-up party. We've signed up to this government. We're going to vote through it. And the Lib Dems have absolutely never recovered. Let's go to this is the last clip we're going to show you. And this is because I said I was writing down wonky questions for James where I didn't know the answer. I was generally sort of, I don't know who to believe here. And it is on this issue of GB energy. Does it make any energy? I don't know. Let's go to the debate, then I'll go to James.
At the end of this Parliament, if they get in, you will not be able to buy a petrol car. If your boiler goes, you'll have to spend tens of thousands of pounds on a new heat pump, other things that need to be done to your home to convert it. My constituents cannot afford that. You heard about
because of your
GB
policies.
Energy. You heard about GB Energy. This is an energy company that your money is going to be put into that doesn't produce any energy at all. It doesn't produce a jot of energy. Oil and gas. This is the insanity of Labour's policy. They are expecting a load of people to invest in oil and gas at the same time saying they're not going to expand the sector. So they're not going to get the money in. And the final thing, if you do this too fast, all you do is destroy our supply chain. We should be building supply chains in this country to produce batteries, to do all sorts of things.
Let's get Angela to
speed Labour are planning,
let Angela
country that will
respond, Penny
benefit
Mordaunt,
is China,
to what you've
and that
said.
will kill off economic growth.
Let's hear the response.
I mean, it's astonishing.
How much energy is it going to produce?
It's astonishing because the Tories have been in power now 14
How
years.
much energy is Great British Energy going to produce?
And we haven't had an industrial strategy or a manufacturing sector in the UK that is
you
about
just said
creating...
it's going to produce energy.
We're just listening to you, Penny.
I think it's pretty important. You're flogging an energy company to these guys. You're expecting them to put their money in.
She's mid-response. Let's hear it.
So that line, I mean, you're flogging an energy company to people that isn't going to create any energy. As I say, I've been meaning to read up on Great British Energy during this election. I have to admit to you all, I haven't done it yet. James Meadway, is Great British Energy going to produce any energy?
The Labour Party say that it will own and operate renewable energy projects. So on that basis, what they're saying is it will produce energy. Yes, that's the point of setting up a publicly owned energy company to do renewable projects.
She should have said that. That was a good answer.
Yes. Now, the problem, and this is like quite a serious problem with it, is that they've taken GB Energy, which isn't in and of itself not a bad idea. It would be a good idea to have a publicly owned renewable energy generating company. And they've said it will have only £8 billion, which is really not very much if you're talking about building like big offshore wind farms and all the rest of it. So that's where you get this business of, we'll invest alongside the private sector, we'll put in some money as well. So you have joint projects. Not unusual if you're talking about big energy investments, but still, it doesn't mean that your £8 billion billion necessarily goes very far against somebody turning up with 10 or whatever it might be. One part of it. The other part of it is they keep drawing up these big lists of it's going to reduce everyone's bills and it's going to drive the net zero transition. It's going to create loads of jobs. And it's like, it's going to do all this for a new institution with £8 billion. This isn't going to happen. Right? They've overpromised, I'd have said, on what you can actually do with GB Energy to make any of this work. So it's not a bad idea, but once they've chopped back at that 28 billion they were going to invest on the Green Prosperity Plan, the whole package of measures, once they've reduced it to like this 8 billion over whatever period of time for Great British Energy, it can't do all the things they're claiming. So I suspect that behind some of the willingness on Labour's part is a desire to try and get into the manifesto something that's not that big a commitment out of all of this.
That was very well explained. And I suppose it's also now clear why Angela Rayner didn't say what you said, because it's not no, we'll produce some energy. Not much.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. We'll produce some energy, small amount. Won't have much effect on jobs or your bills, but it's a start. It's a start. Luckily, we've got loads and loads of time to sort out the climate issue. No rush at all. What was missing, to my mind, we didn't hear any. I suppose we heard foreign affairs only to the extent that sort of, would you nuke your enemies? Gaza was never mentioned. I think housing was only really mentioned in the context of immigration, which was a shame. Anything else, James, that you thought was missing that you would have liked to have heard about?
Well, climate change was sort of there around the edges, but not really. There's a whole stack of things. The obvious, actually, the cuts thing did come up, which we talked about and was going to happen. Anything in foreign policy wasn't there. You're absolutely right. And that there's what are you really going to do about the cost of living crisis? And this is where I just get completely cynical over any number of politicians saying, here is a big list of marvelous things that will happen which will vote if you vote for us. And it's like the concrete details on how are you actually going to put up people's wages, how are you going to make sure that people actually have jobs, how are you going to do any of these things? It just isn't there. And it's not like the cost of living crisis is actually going to go away for most people. Stuff is still really expensive and wages not keeping up with that. What are Labour going to do about that? Tories actually have an answer. It's unbelievable, but they're going to cut your taxes, right? It's not credible at all, but that's what they say they're going to do. What is Labour's answer to that? Answer came there, none.
Okay, final questions. There's two of them. First off, who were the biggest losers of the night? Or losers, one or two?
Well, that's two, isn't there? It was Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt. I thought the two main parties came off absolutely terribly throughout all of this. They were exposed on the basis of policy. They were exposed on the basis of sort of presentation. I thought Angela Rayner had a particularly sort of rough time of it, which is surprising because, if you're Penny Mordaunt and you have to defend this week and this campaign and this Conservative Party and this record, that's a very bad place to start from. I thought Angela Rayner was surprisingly sort of bad at this, but frankly, neither of them did very well. Neither of them came off looking like they had any significant or useful things to say about anything much, and basically everyone else did a lot better.
And biggest winner, is it just a case of everyone else?
It's tempting to say that. I'm not sure. I don't think Nigel Farage had his moments, but it was like very much this is his audience and he was going to talk to it. I don't think that has particularly shifted. If you're thinking about who might have shifted perceptions, you're probably dealing with like the two sort of national parties in Wales and Scotland, where you don't get to see them, down south or to the east too often. So just to hear what they had to say about themselves and what they thought they were doing, I think is more likely to have shifted perceptions. As I said, I think Carla Denyer did very well in terms of positioning what the Greens standing for, which at the minute looks like a sort of more leftish version of the Lib Dems, and she herself's obviously pretty sharp on her feet in terms of some of the interjections and coming back in the main parties and the rest of it.
So the big conclusion is that people who can't vote SNP or Plaid Cymru are more likely to want to vote SNP or vote Plaid Cymru. So a very useful evening for all. James Meadway, thank you so much for joining me. You've been a fantastic viewing partner.
No problem at all. Nice to be here again.
We're going to go to a couple of super chats actually before we wrap up. Holly Judge, you're my staple as a news channel. Please keep it up with your highly considered discussions and much needed influence. Thank you so much for that. I like to think we've got influence. I sometimes wonder about that. Angel Valentin, hi, I'm an American, but I have a masochistic interest in politics and I love your coverage. I only recently found this channel and this is already the second debate analysis I've watched. Keep it up. Thank you so much for that. You must have a a really masochistic passion for elections, because obviously you've got your own one coming up soon. If you do want to support our work, please do go to novaramedia.com/support, set up a monthly donation. That's what keeps us going. We are a supporter-funded channel. The next sort of televised big election event will be on Wednesday at 7 p.m. So immediately after Novara Live, we'll be covering some of that. Obviously, we'll be back on Monday at 6 p.m. for Novara Live as usual. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll see you then. Good night.